Chapter 475. The eggs hatched. It had been a long time since the fat duck snatched the eggs. Compared to the eggs in the other nests, these eggs hatched much later. They were from the same nest, but the fat duck snatched the eggs and took a long time to hatch. If this was a coincidence, then there were too many coincidences. But if the fat duck was not efficient at hatching the eggs, that was not the case either. Even if it was an amateur, the eggs would not have hatched so differently. "I'll go take a look." Xiao Xian passed the things he was carrying to Zheng Luo and the rest. He pushed through the crowd and followed the person in charge of the duck shed. "It's been snowing too much recently. We've been sweeping the snow at least 3 times a day. When it doesn't stop, we'll even sweep at night." The person leading the way sounded worried. Many ducks have frozen to death this year. The ducks that did not want to go near the tribe had indeed frozen to death. Even the older ducklings were not spared. Many ducks brought their ducklings into the duck shed to seek shelter. Xiao Xian listened to the person in front of him talk about the recent happenings while observing the duck shed. The other duck sheds around him were quiet. Only the occasional duck call could be heard, but it did not sound energetic. When they arrived at the duck shed where the fat duck lived, the person leading the way did not enter. He pointed inside and stood at the door. He could not enter at all. If he pushed the door open, he would be attacked by the fat duck inside. He could only stand at the door and listen. Indeed, there was a young voice coming from inside. Xiao Xian pushed the door open and a murderous aura rushed towards him. To prevent the cold wind from blowing in, Xiao Xian quickly closed the door behind him. He took out a glowing crystal and placed it beside him for light. Seeing that it was Xiao Xian, the fat duck froze. It maintained its attacking posture but did not move. Its eyes darted around as if it did not expect Xiao Xian to come. It was still very wary of Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked towards the duck nest. A few green balls of feathers were huddled there. They looked up at the light source but could not see Xiao Xian clearly. They only felt a foreign aura and panicked. But when they sensed the fat duck beside them, they quickly calmed down. Xiao Xian also noticed a small detail. When a duck stood up from its nest, its feet hooked onto a piece of hay. A piece of hay was cut in half. It was the same foot as a fat duck's, but with a sharp hook. Beside the fat duck were some eggs that had not hatched. They were still in the process of hatching. After all, these eggs were hatched at different times and hatched at different times. Xiao Xian counted. There were about 8 green balls of feathers. When he left the tribe for the salt mines, he counted 31 eggs. This meant that there were still 23 eggs that had not hatched. He wondered if all of them would hatch successfully. Thinking about it, Xiao Xian felt that it was strange. None of the ducklings he saw before looked like this fat duck. Xiao Xian wondered if the fat duck's bloodline was too weak. Was that why the other ducklings did not look like it? Or were they cuckolded? But now it seemed that the fat duck had planned this all along. It knew how to pick the eggs from the nest. And the ones it picked out all looked like it. No wonder it did not care about the ducklings outside. Perhaps to it, only the ducklings here that looked like it were its own. It did not care about the others. Look at how tightly it protected these ducklings. Compared to the ones before, it was like heaven and earth. In the natural world, anything that was not its own would be killed, just like a pride of lions. And now, this fat duck was using a similar strategy and attitude. Only those it picked out would be treated well. Everything else was meaningless. Just as he was about to leave, Xiao Xian saw some strange marks on the ground. He took a closer look and realized that they were fish scales. Using his special vision, Xiao Xian scanned the house. In the corner behind the duck nest, there was a thin layer of hay. There were some small fish and fruits under it. This duck was well prepared. After looking around, Xiao Xian came out of the duck shed. "How is it?" How many did you hatch? The person in charge of the duck shed asked curiously. 8 hatched. The rest are still hatching. What do the ducklings look like? Just like the fat duck. The person in charge of the duck shed was even more curious. Unfortunately, he did not dare to go in. Don't worry. When the snow stops and winter is over, they will naturally come out, said Xiao Xian. After leaving the duck shed, Xiao Xian was called to Zheng Luo's place on the mountain. He had a hot meal and went back to sleep. During this time, no one in the team had a good rest. Xiao Xian only slept for a day. The others slept for 2 days and 2 nights without waking up. On the 3rd day back at the tribe, although it was snowing heavily, the tribe still held a farewell ceremony. They built a barrier around the fire pit and cremated the warriors who had sacrificed themselves. Survival meant endless wars and endless life and death. The people in the tribe had long been used to such farewells. Although their hearts were heavy, it was much better than what they had expected. After the ceremony, Xiao Xian was called for a meeting. This was the first time everyone had gathered for a meeting after returning from the salt flats. After treatment and rest, Zheng Luo's injuries were better and he could walk now. They had already told the shamaness and the higher-ups about what happened at the salt mines. There were happy and sad moments. No one objected to losing the salt mines. Even if they did not see the king beast, they knew that with their current strength, they could not fight it. Giving up on the king beast and avoiding conflict was the best choice. Fortunately, they brought back a lot of salt. Most importantly, they brought back fire crystals. This made everyone very excited. With these fire crystals, the tribe's warriors could strengthen and improve their strength. Especially those who were at a bottleneck. The fire crystals could solve their problems. The Taiha tribe sent over some herbs. Some were effective for frostbite, some for disease prevention. After all, it was the first time they had encountered such weather. The warriors were more or less not used to it, especially the children, who fell sick easily. The shamaness explained the various arrangements for this snow disaster. It was impossible to leave this place. In this kind of weather, it was impossible to leave. Moreover, they didn't know if other places would be better than here. They could only stay in the tribe and resist the weather. The warriors chopped some firewood and stored it in the house to keep warm. Fortunately, they had a lot of animal hides so they did not have to worry about shelter. According to the Taiha people, some of the smaller tribes in the forest had already frozen to death. They did not know the details. In this weather, it was impossible to investigate. After everything was settled, the higher-ups discussed Fox and Shen. When winter was over and the snow stopped, they would investigate and see how the people in the salt mines were doing. Mountain Wind wanted to start a war against Fox. They had tried to persuade Zheng Luo and Taiha to join but Zheng Luo did not agree immediately. It wasn't just the flaming horns. Taiha and Mountain Wind were also thinking about the Fox and Shen tribes who were still at the mines. What was the situation like now? At this moment, a massacre was taking place on the salt flats and snowy plains. The Beast King didn't care if those people were on the same side. It would do whatever it wanted. To it, it was the only one in this white land. It was its territory. All other creatures had to step aside. It had only intended to do what it had done when it encountered the group of people before. It would roar twice, blow a few breaths, and knock its tail as a warning. However, it did not expect that this group of little things would dare to resist and even use force against it. This was a challenge to the king beast. It was enraged. People with animal skin bags full of salt and fire crystals were running for their lives in the thick layer of snow on the salt ground. Those who couldn't escape had already been frozen into ice, or had been sent flying. No one knew where they fell, but no one cared about them. The Fox and Shen people were all running for their lives. They thought they would return with their bags full of loot after not seeing the king beast. They did not expect to meet it again. The people who had been used as bait by the fox chief had all been frozen into ice, cracked by the cold wind and scattered among the snow. Without the bait, the people from the two tribes who had not managed to escape were dwindling rapidly. The leader of the fox took his lover and sprinted through the snow. He did not have the time to look at the others. Those who could keep up with him, those who could not could only become a part of the snow. The fox people had split into 3 teams, escaping in 3 different directions. He did not know how the other 2 teams were doing. There were more than 1,200 people from the fox tribe. But now, there were only about 300 left. They had not made it out of the salt flats and there were still the Shan people to share the firepower. Thinking about the losses today, the fox chief's heart bled. Not just the salt and fire crystals, they had lost a lot of people. It was enough to force him to step down. He did not even dare to imagine what would happen when he returned. "It's all the Yanjiao's fault," scolded the woman in the fox chief's arms. Yes, it was all the Yanjiao's fault. If it weren't for the flaming horns, their plan would have been executed on time. Everything would have gone smoothly. The salt caves would have been destroyed and the teams from the other 3 tribes would have suffered from the cold. Then, they would have gone to the Shan salt caves and fought with the outsiders. The fox tribe would have just been waiting to pick up the leftovers. The king beast was an accident. However, they had run so far but did not see any Yanjiao or Taihe or mountain wind corpses. Did they all escape? He even purposely chose the path Yanjiao took but all he saw was a thin layer of snow. Other than that, there were no other traces. No, they must have all been eaten. They must have. Although he was more inclined to believe that the 3 tribes had all left, the fox chief did not want to admit it. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. His eyes were bloodshot. If they could escape this time, he would not let the Yanjiao people go. He would not let them go. Chapter 476. The blizzard continued, even more ferocious than before. Fortunately, compared to the salt flats, the tribe was much calmer. The current blizzard was only a little more ferocious than the previous one. But for the warriors who had experienced the blizzard in the salt flats, it was much easier. Looking at the snow outside, they were very calm. Xiao Xian rested for a few days. After his body had fully recovered, he walked out of the house, braving the cold wind and snow, to the place where the shaman had arranged for him to train. Because there were not many people living here, and the soil was not suitable for farming, most of the time it was empty and became a playground for the children. Even if Xiao Xian had been training before, he would spare a few days for the younger generation of the tribe to practice their throwing and chopping. But now it was snowing, and even the senior totem warriors were unwilling to come out, not to mention the younger generation who were not strong enough. In such a large area, there was only Xiao Xian. Because no one came here, in order to save manpower, the snow was not cleared. Therefore, the snow here was much thicker than in the densely populated areas. It was already taller than Xiao Xian's height. Now the snow was still falling, and the snow was still piling up. Xiao Xian followed the path cleared by the tribal warriors to the end of the road. Looking at the white snow wall in front of him, he took a deep breath. The totem power in his body was running, but it was not as crazy as before. There were no opponents or enemies here, so he did not need to deal with it in such an intense way. He also did not need to bear the totem power and the power of inheritance. There was no hurry, he could take it slow. The totem power was running all over his body, and the power of inheritance was separated from the totem flame and gathered in the totem bone ornament on his chest. Just like the previous times when he borrowed the power of the ancestors, the difference was that this time it was more gentle. The previous practice was just to familiarize himself, but now it was to control it more precisely. There was no need to be intense, he just needed to do every detail according to his will, and not lose control. Whoosh, the flame came out of the bone ornament, gradually expanding until it wrapped Xiao Xian's whole body. The totemic power in his body drove the airflow that overflowed from his pores. It intertwined with the whistling of the wind outside, making a whining sound. As the wind became more intense, the sound became louder. The thin layer of snow that had accumulated on the ground beneath his feet seemed to have been swept away, leaving only a round, earth-colored ground. Half an arm's length away from Xiao Xian, there was a 3-meter-high layer of snow in front of him. However, the thick layer of snow was sinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. The snow wall closest to Xiao Xian seemed to be pushed away from Xiao Xian by an invisible hand. In the midst of the white snow, Xiao Xian, who was wrapped in a layer of red flames, slowly lifted a foot and took a step forward. Boom! His foot landed on the ground like the hooves of a giant beast in the forest. There was a rumbling sound, and the ground shook. The force of this stomp on the ground created air currents and shock waves, causing the originally dented snow wall in front of him to quickly expand, the arc increasing in size. Chunks of white snow were lifted from the large snow wall, flying into the distance. A small piece of gravel flew out from the crack in the ground under his feet and shot into the snow wall like a bullet. The first step slowed down for a second step. The second step was the same as the first. There was a loud rumble when he stepped on the ground. The layer of snow continued to be pushed back by the force of his step. Chunks of snow flew into the air. A bigger gap appeared on the snow wall as it moved further away from him. The effect of these two steps couldn't compare to the time he sent the Linlu chief flying with one palm in the royal city. It couldn't compare to the force he used against the king beast either. It couldn't even compare to the 2 steps he used at Gongjia Mountain. Although the sound was loud, it was nothing compared to the previous few times. The force was still strong but much gentler. It wasn't as intense as before. It was much gentler. This was the result of Xiao Xian's control. He wanted to control them more precisely and master them more skillfully. Instead of wasting them in useless places, he wanted to focus them as much as possible and use them on the target he had set. Not enough, this control wasn't enough. The third step, the fourth step, step by step, he took it slowly. The rumbling sound gradually quieted, the ground shaking weaker with each step. The gravel on the ground was no longer sent flying, and the snow on the wall no longer flew. Everything was progressing in a more peaceful direction. Compared to the peaceful movements outside, Xiao Xian's power was circulating more intensely. The totemic power in his body circulated again and again so that his body could sustain the bone ornament's power. His skin changed with the changes. Totemic patterns that were red like molten lava flowed with flames, almost covering Xiao Xian's entire body. Within the totemic flames, blue flames surged like a flood, gathering at his chest. At this moment, Xiao Xian couldn't hear anything from the outside world. There was only the sound of his blood and the thumping of his heart. The air around his body flowed like boiling steam. The humming sound became more rapid. However, it didn't take long for the rapid humming sound to fade. His body was so stiff that he couldn't move when he used the bone ornaments. Now, he could take more than one step. His stiff movements became smoother and more natural. His heavy footsteps also became lighter. In the vast expanse of white snow, Xiao Xian was like a red fish, swimming leisurely in the white sea of snow. Zheng Luo looked at Xiao Xian as if he was a monster. No one in the tribe could feel the power of the bone ornaments more deeply than him. When Xiao Xian used the bone ornaments against the king beast, Zheng Luo was the closest. He couldn't dodge in time and was sent flying. He couldn't even walk when he left the salt fields. He had to be carried back by Duo Kong. After recuperating for so long, he could only move his legs a few times. Even running was difficult. But looking at Xiao Xian, he had gone from unleashing his power with every kick and punch to now being restrained and calm. The change was so fast that he could not believe it. How could he release such power so freely? If it was so easy, there wouldn't be only one Xiao Xian in thousands of years. The shamaness wore a thick fur coat, braving the freezing wind and snow. Her eyes were filled with relief. She turned to Zheng Luo. Has everything been arranged? Yes, they left this morning. Zheng Luo was hopeful and worried. I hope they can arrive safely. Let's hope so. The shamaness looked at the conspicuous figure walking down the mountain step by step. She turned to leave with Zheng Luo. Xiao Xian could walk so easily in the snow. One of them was old and the other was injured. They couldn't stay in this environment for too long. After walking for a while, Xiao Xian's body was already sweating. He took a short break to adjust himself before continuing. A 3-meter wide road appeared where Xiao Xian walked. The snow on the road was pushed away, leaving only the earth. However, the falling snow soon covered the ground in a layer of white. Plop plop, the snow wall in front of them became even harder because of the pressure, and it bulged upward in an arc. The further he walked, the harder the snow wall became. It made it harder for Xiao Xian to walk. Every time Xiao Xian took a step, the snow on the wall would squeak and squeak. At the foot of the mountain, the soldiers in charge of patrolling carried shovels and went to rest in the temporary shelter they made. The so-called temporary shelter was, in fact, a narrower side road that they dug next to the road that they had cleared. Then, at the end of the side road, they opened up a square area about 3 meters in length and width. The 20 soldiers who were sweeping the snow were currently huddled in this 3-meter-high shelter. They leaned against the solid snow wall and talked. The cold wind was still blowing. There was wind here too, but the wind was weaker here. It wasn't as cold as before. This damn weather, when will it stop? A soldier complained. Who knows? After I'm done here, I have to go back and clear the roof. Otherwise, the house will collapse. I heard that this is a disaster that happens once in 1,000 years. I don't know how it is in other places. It's more than 1,000 years. I heard that it doesn't happen once in 10,000 years. The patrolling soldiers hid in the temporary shelter and chatted. As they were talking, a soldier sitting against the snow wall suddenly had a large piece of snow fall on his head. Ouch! The soldier quickly brushed the snow off his head. It didn't hurt, but the cold made him feel even colder. The others standing against the wall couldn't help but look up at the snow wall. How could such a large piece of snow fall? Was it blown by the wind? Be careful, more snow is falling. At the edge of the snow wall, pieces of snow bulged and fell outwards as if someone was pushing them. The soldiers near the snow wall quickly moved away. What's that sound? Plop plop, crack crack, the sound was getting clearer. The 20 soldiers forgot to shiver and stared nervously. Crack crack. The snow wall cracked and slid down the mountain. Oh no, run. Some of the soldiers had gone to the mountains further away for hunting. There was snow and ice there all year round. It was said that if you stomped on the ground or shouted at the top of the mountain, you would encounter a torrent of snow rushing down. Could it be that this happened in the tribe? It shouldn't be. The mountain in the tribe wasn't high and the slope wasn't steep. The snow wouldn't slide down. No matter what, it was best to avoid it. The 20 soldiers quickly retreated along the side road. After retreating for a distance, they looked in that direction again. The place where they were originally standing had been replaced by falling snow. And there, it looked like a white giant worm was crawling down the mountain, bit by bit. It was quite rhythmic. The patrolling soldiers carried big shovels and looked at everything in front of them in shock. They were still wondering what was going on. They stood there for a long time until they sensed the breath of Xiao Xian. Elder. Elder. Chapter 477. Ever since they knew the consequences of Xiao Xian's training over there, the patrolling warriors' interest was to wait there after they finished sweeping the snow. The side road was still there, so they directly retreated from the temporary resting point and turned it into a shelter. Originally, the patrolling warriors wanted to follow the original method and make an open-air resting point, but that would also cause them to freeze and be blown by the cold wind. One day, Xiao Xian suddenly remembered a method. He taught them to use simple tools and water to make large ice bricks. The water in the river had been frozen thick, so they couldn't go there to break the ice. They could only melt the snow themselves and pour it into the tools. After freezing it for a while, ice bricks would be formed in just a few breaths. It was very efficient. Such ice bricks were quickly accepted by the people in the tribe, and even some warriors who were not on duty came out to help. Now, from the top of the mountain to the bottom, there were many igloos scattered in an I shape. The foundation of the igloos was also made of ice. They were piled high above the snow, and then the houses were built on top of it. The patrolling warriors would go to the igloos to rest and drink some hot water to warm up their bodies. From here, they could see the situation further away. The people in the tribe who had been locked up at home would also go for a walk or two out of curiosity. Xiao Xian was also worried that these people would suffer from snow blindness because of facing the snow for a long time, so he reminded them. But until now, no one had suffered from snow blindness. Look, the elder is pushing the snow again. The people lying on the window of the igloos looked outside and said, "Where is it? Let me see." There were 3 small windows, but people rushed to see. These igloos were built close to the first road that Xiao Xian pushed out. Xiao Xian would walk along a new road every day. From a high vantage point, one could see a person wrapped in flames walking slowly on the white snow. And in front of him, there seemed to be a giant white worm moving down the mountain. Apart from the initial shock, the patrolling soldiers now treated this as their daily entertainment. The tribe worshipped the strong. Not to mention the cold they had to endure when walking in the snow in the stormy weather, they had also tried to push the snow. Unfortunately, the seemingly insignificant snow piled up together was exceptionally firm and heavy. They could not push it after piling it up for a while. Usually, they thought that they were quite strong. Duo Kong walked in from outside, patted the snow off his body, and asked, "How is the sentry post at the foot of the mountain?" Tao Zheng and the others are continuing today. They said they want to make it a bit higher so that they can see far away from the top. They won't have to go out and suffer from the cold, a warrior said. It's a good thing to use ice bricks as sentry posts, but don't slack off. I'm going to check. Duo Kong scolded. Yes, I promise I won't slack off. Yes. Duo Kong nodded and pushed the person by the window aside, looking outside. Let me see how Xiao Xian's pushing snow is going. The warrior standing at the side pursed his lips. Wasn't it just to snatch the window? He even scolded them with a stern face. At the foot of the mountain, on the opposite side of the river, tall sentry posts were built. Large ice bricks were continuously sent there. After building a few outposts, the warriors had nothing to do, so they tried to connect the outposts together. They used ice bricks to create a path so that they wouldn't have to brave the wind and snow when they moved around. Moreover, it looked like they had built a city wall. Looking at the path that was built comparable to a city wall, the patrolling warriors were even more motivated. This kind of snowy weather was not without fun. For those who had nothing to do, it was another kind of experience. The beasts in the forest rarely appeared now. In this kind of weather, it was impossible to go out to hunt. Fortunately, everyone had a lot of food, so they would not starve. If they ate sparingly, they could still survive, as long as this kind of snowy weather did not continue. Many people in the tribe did not know that a team of 50 people was braving the snow and leaving the forest. These people were sent out by the chief and the shamaness. Although they might miss the most important ritual of the year, the shamaness and the chief specially allowed them to be absent. This was because to the shamaness and the chief, this matter was more important than the ritual. It concerned the future of the tribe. The leader was called Xiang Chen. He was slightly younger than Duo Kong and was also an advanced totemic warrior. However, in the past year, he had not been in the tribe for most of the time. Xiang Chen was part of the first group to follow Xiao Xian to the seaside. He had walked the road from the tribe to the seaside twice. This was his third time. This time, Xiang Chen was ordered to bring people to the seaside to see the situation there. According to other people's thoughts, why would they go out in such cold weather? However, the shamaness and the chief wanted this kind of weather. The shamaness and the chief even hoped that the cold weather would last as long as it did as they thought. The path Xiang Chen took was different from the one Xiao Xian took when he first found the tribe. When Xiao Xian first went from the seaside to the tribe, he almost walked in a straight line. However, it was more difficult to walk that way. Later on, the people of the tribe took another route to the seaside. They walked out of the forest with difficulty. When they passed by Amba City, they found that Amba City, which was not too deserted in the past, was now deserted outside the city. There were shadows walking around the towers on the city walls, but no one else could be seen anywhere else. They wanted to find a place to rest in Amba City and exchange for some food. Now, it seemed that this plan was not successful. The city gates were closed, and no one was allowed to enter. "Let's continue," Xiang Chen called out to the others. Compared to the forest, there was less snow here. Perhaps in the eyes of the people of Amba City, this was a heavy snow that had not been seen in 1,000 years. Even walking was difficult. However, Xiang Chen and the others who walked out of the forest did not think so. The snow here was only waist deep. Every time they met someone on the road and overheard them talking about, "The snow is already waist deep, how are we going to survive?" Xiang Chen and the others couldn't help but say, "It's only waist deep and you're already so shocked. If you go into the forest, will your eyeballs fall out of your sockets?" Along the way, they also encountered robbers, but very few. In this kind of weather, professional robbers were not willing to come out. Those who came out were amateurs. They were forced out by the wind and snow. Due to hunger and cold, their eyes became fierce, and they looked ready to risk everything. Unfortunately, Xiang Chen and the others were not merciful people. If they were so soft-hearted, they would not have lived until now. If these robbers only begged and spoke softly, perhaps Xiang Chen and the others could give them some food. However, if they stood in front of them with knives, they could not be blamed for being merciless. Fresh blood splattered on the snow and quickly froze with the water. Those who fell there would be lucky to be covered by the snow, but unlucky ones would become the targets of others who were hungry and cold. Along the way, Xiang Chen had seen too many. The further they walked, the thinner the snow became. Xiang Chen's heart sank. Although he did not like this snow disaster, according to the shamaness and the chief, it might be best if this cold weather continued. Most importantly, had the sea frozen? This was the shamaness' hope. The shamaness said that if the sea froze, they should continue forward. If there was a large patch of ice, this would be an opportunity. They could return to their old haunt after 1,000 years and reunite with the other group. Perhaps, the Yinjiao's hidden disease could be cured. Who would not want to live twice as long? They would not have to consider leaving the hunting team after hunting for another 20 or 30 years, and then have to watch people from other tribes who were older than them hunt bravely in the forest. Just thinking about it was miserable. Please don't freeze, please don't. After leaving Amba City, they passed by a smaller city. It was the same as Amba City. The city gates were tightly shut, and there was a solemn and heavy atmosphere, just like the hearts of the people in the city. But there, the snow only reached their thighs. As they continued forward, Xiang Chen's bad feeling grew stronger. When they finally stepped into the semi-desert, Xiang Chen panted and looked into the distance. Here, the snow only reached their knees. They continued forward, step by step, into this once dry land. There were camel beasts looking for ice on the ground. Their fur had grown long, and they huddled together in groups for warmth, eating snow to replenish their water. When they saw Xiang Chen's group, the camel beasts turned around and ran away. Xiang Chen did not chase. He still had food on him, and he was not in the mood to hunt. His footsteps quickened as he headed straight for the sea. Tall cylindrical cacti stood there like icicles. They were like thorns, stabbing at Xiang Chen's group until their hearts bled. The sea did not freeze. Only the areas near the sea were partially frozen. But that ice was nothing compared to the layer of ice in the man-made river in front of the tribe. Could people walk on it? Not to mention, the sea was still flowing far away from the shore. The wind lifted the waves, crashing against the frozen ice. The blue sea, the snow-covered sand, the clash of two colors. To some people, this was a rare beauty. But Xiang Chen's group was utterly disappointed. It was as if they had lost all their strength. Their exhaustion intensified. They knelt on the snow-covered sand, punching holes in the ground. Their path was cut off. They didn't even know if there was any hope of crossing this sea in their lifetime. How long was a person's life? For people who did the same thing every day, it seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Xiang Chen seemed to see his old self sitting at the door, chopping wood and making straw rope. But the people of the same age as him in the neighboring tribe were happily dragging their prey back and forth every day. He could not bear to think about it anymore. With a sigh and a strong sense of disappointment, Xiang Chen's group returned to the tribe. If the shamaness knew, she would probably cry herself to death by the fire pit. How long would they have to wait to return to their homeland? Where was the road? None of them knew. Chapter 478. Royal City. This year's snow caught everyone in Royal City off guard. Even the Yi family did not foresee such a disaster. At most, they predicted that it would snow early and snow heavily. These were all predicted. Even the approximate time of the snow was announced. However, no one would have thought that the so-called heavy snow was actually such a situation. Everyone was frowning all day. In the fields outside the city, a large number of crops had died. Recently, every field owner's mood was like a blizzard. The slaves were trembling in fear, afraid of being beaten to death or thrown out of the royal city fields. Beating them to death was fine. But if they were thrown out, they would be tortured by the cold. How could they survive in the snow outside that was half the height of a person? Inside the golden grain fields, it was also gloomy. The field owner, Ji Ju, had thrown a few tantrums recently. The senior and junior stewards all shrunk their heads and did not dare to make a fuss. Ji Ju's anger was not directed at his subordinates. Although he complained about the weather, the ones he scolded the most were the Yi family. A bunch of trash. An exquisitely designed teapot with colorful patterns was thrown out and smashed to pieces. 2 copper plates were also smashed to the ground with a clatter. The junior stewards outside trembled. They did not dare to step in. They just stood there like ostriches. Inside the house, the senior steward waited for Ji Ju to calm down before lowering his head to tidy up the things on the ground. There were no other servants here. Only the senior steward came in and out often. The junior stewards had to stay far away unless they were permitted. The house was warm with a stove burning. Ji Ju sat cross-legged on a thick furry cushion. He was in a bad mood because another crop in the field had frozen to death. Even though they were prepared for the cold, they still could not withstand this kind of weather. How many times had this happened since winter? 7 times. 8 times. In the past, even if other fields had crops frozen to death in winter, it rarely happened in the golden grain fields. Ji Ju saw this as a mistake. As long as he did the right thing, he could avoid it. Ji Ju had always felt that he had done a perfect job. The 1,000-grain gold incident was a little depressing because the Yanjiao people had planted it first, but it passed quickly. Now, the 8th mistake had occurred. How could he, who had always pursued perfection, remain calm? Although it was due to the weather, it was a fact that something had happened. It couldn't be denied. Trash. Ji-ju scolded again. The trash he was referring to was still the Yi family. Usually, those people would raise their chins to the sky, but now. He couldn't even answer when asked when the weather would improve. What a piece of trash. Ji-ju wanted to ask the most powerful old man in the Yi family. Unfortunately, the old man had been in seclusion for years. Even if Ji-ju went personally, the old man would not come out and help with the divination. What's going on outside? Ji-ju drank some hot water to moisten his throat and asked. The chief steward quickly glanced at the few figures shivering in the cold outside. He bowed and replied, I heard that they are here to deliver a message. What message? Ji-ju's tone was getting worse. The chief steward bowed even lower, not daring to look at Ji-ju's face. They say, someone wants your grains, bam. Ji-ju slammed the copper cup in his hand on the ground. Tell them to scram. The chief steward paused and did not leave immediately. Instead, he said, I heard that another tribe came to seek refuge in the royal city. The king asked the other nobles to give some grains as a loan to the new tribe. They didn't come before. Now that there's a snow disaster, they all came quickly. Ji-ju's tone was sarcastic, but he didn't take it to heart. No. If the others want to give, let them. Our golden grain fields won't give. The nobles of the royal city did intend to take advantage of this snow disaster to take in a few more tribes. It was fine at first, but now, the snow showed no signs of stopping. More and more tribes came to seek refuge. Settling them down was difficult. There was a serious shortage of food. The higher-ups were troubled. Even the grains in the hands of the nobles were not enough. Knowing that the fields had a bountiful harvest today, they all came to Ji-ju, hoping that he would provide some support. After all, the more people who came to seek refuge, the bigger the kingdom would be. It would be far from the influence of the tribes. Receiving Ji-ju's message, the chief steward did not speak. He only listened to Ji-ju. As for the others, it was none of his business. A few junior stewards who had been given important tasks by the other nobles were called in by Ji-ju and scolded. 2 of them were even stripped of their duties. No matter how much the junior steward cried and begged, Ji-ju ignored him. Just as the 2 junior stewards were feeling gloomy, someone rushed in from outside. It was a guard from the fields, one who was in charge of guarding the 1,000 grain gold. Seeing someone rush in without notifying him, Ji-ju was about to explode in anger. But when he saw who it was, he suppressed his anger and asked nervously, did something happen over there? It's... No, it's not. The person panted. His face was red, either from excitement or from the cold. Is it, yes or no? Ji-ju was angry. Master, over there, it's ripened. The 2 words jumped out of the guard's mouth. As soon as he heard ripened, Ji-ju rushed out. The junior steward who was still sobbing in the room thought quickly. If something good happened over there and the master was in a good mood, would he be able to plead for leniency? Thinking of this, the 2 junior stewards did not care about their fur coats and rushed out as well. Ji-ju's 1,000 grain gold had ripened in the middle of the snowstorm, much earlier than he had expected. In the snow, the golden husks were dazzling. Even the guards outside could smell an extremely fragrant smell. The smell was not strong, but it made people drool. Ji-ju personally harvested the grains and carefully peeled off one of them. After removing the golden husks, the grains inside were white. Ji-ju's eyes narrowed. He remembered something he had asked Xiao Xian before. Xiao Xian, what color do you think the grains in my field will be in the end? White. White. That was what Xiao Xian had answered back then. It's really white. Ji-ju felt that the ripening of the 1,000 grain gold was a hint to him. Just 1 grain of white 1,000-grain gold was enough to fill a person's stomach for at least a day. It was not an illusion either. They were truly full. When the royal city needed grains the most, the 1,000-grain gold had ripened. Ji-ju looked at the snow outside in silence. After a while, he said to the senior steward, "Call them over." They referred to those small stewards just now. Ji-ju decided to open the barn to sell the grains. He did not have a good impression of those who only came to seek shelter now. But he was willing to follow the hint of the 1,000-grain gold. Even if he was wrong in the end, at least he had tried. At that moment, a few special guests came to the royal city's family. Because everyone was talking about the new tribe, they did not pay much attention to these people. They thought they were from the same tribe. The people who came to the family were the fox chief and the flirtatious woman. When they escaped from the salt flats, there were only 100 of them left. They did not manage to escape back to the tribe. Because of the king beast's pursuit, they changed directions at the last minute. Otherwise, they would have been in a worse state. The rest of the Shan tribe became bait to lure the king beast away. That was the only way they could escape. After leaving the salt flats, the fox chief led the rest of his people away. They did not return to the tribe. Instead, they left the forest. If they returned to the tribe like this, they would lose the salt mine, the fire crystals, and so many people. They would despise him and he would lose his position as chief. That was why the fox chief decided to find a solution before returning to the tribe. The woman beside the fox chief was half family blood. However, her divination skills were not outstanding. She would not be treated well if she stayed with the family. That was why she spent most of her time in the fox tribe. However, the fox tribe and the family still interacted frequently. The fox chief knew roughly when the weather would change because of the family's help. This time, the fox chief came to ask for help. He wanted to work with the family to deal with the Yanjiao tribe. The family might not agree to deal with the Mountain Wind and Taiha tribes. Even if they won, it would be a devastating victory. It would not be worth it. However, if they were going to deal with the Flaming Horns, they would have to reconsider. Because the Yanjiao were outsiders. The family and the other families in the royal city were wary of them. The fox chief heard this from the woman beside him. She had learned this when they came to the royal city in winter. This was the perfect time to make things worse. Although the fox chief wanted to get rid of all 3 tribes, he had to do it one by one. First, he had to deal with the Yanjiao tribe. Along the way, the fox chief had thought about many things. The more he thought, the more he hated the Yanjiao people. That was why they were in such dire straits. That was why when he spoke to the family, the fox chief made many guesses. The Yanjiao people seem to know when the weather will change. They are even more accurate than you. They came at the right time and left just as the storm stopped. It was just a guess and the fox chief did not believe it himself. But in order to instill fear in the family, he had to be sure. Also, I heard the king beast roar at them but I didn't see their bodies. Even if they were eaten by the king beast, it shouldn't have eaten them all. There wasn't even a trace of blood. They also brought a lot of salt and fire crystals. The fox chief added fuel to the fire. When they heard that someone was more accurate than the family, the faces of the family members changed. When they heard that someone could leave alive after being eaten by the king beast, they became even more fearful. The fire crystals were not as attractive. Are you telling the truth? The person sitting at the head of the table asked in a low voice. He did not want to pursue the matter of the fox hiding the salt. It was just salt. The family did not care about it. But the other things were different. It's true. The fox chief looked at the woman beside him. She hurriedly stood up and bowed. It's true. When she lowered her head, a strange light flashed in her eyes. The fox leader probably did not believe his own words, but she knew that it was the truth. The Yanjiao people seemed to have an even bigger secret. The Yi family did not believe everything the two of them said. But when they questioned the other fox tribesmen who came with the fox chief, they believed most of it. The Yi family asked questions skillfully. They did not believe that the tribesmen could lie to them. That was why even if the fox chief's words were not entirely true, most of it was the truth. A few of the Yi family's most powerful people gathered for a discussion. I told you, we have to be careful of the Yanjiao people. The Yanjiao people cannot be allowed to live. I will go to the king tomorrow and discuss this with the other families, said the person sitting at the head of the table. The Yanjiao people had to be dealt with. Perhaps, this change in the weather was a hint from the heavens? Chapter 479. Any member of the Yi family who was slightly better at divination would feel an indescribable sense of danger. It was not the type that would destroy them, but it would always distract them from other things. Their minds would be in turmoil, but the divination would not yield any results. This was a very unpleasant feeling. For the Yi family, who prided themselves on being able to see into the future, this was like a knife hanging over their heads. This year's snowstorm was like a slap to their faces. Ever since the weather became like this, many people had paid the Yi family handsomely for a hint, but there was a limit to what the Yi family could do. The arrival of the fox chief was, without a doubt, another way for them to vent their frustrations. It also gave them a hint to ease their discomfort. Perhaps it was because of the Yanjiao people that they felt threatened. Didn't the one from the Yi family make a prophecy? The aristocrats of the 6 tribes had been worried about what the prophecy was referring to. The last time the Yanjiao people came to the royal city, they sent the Linlu chief flying with one blow and destroyed the royal city gates. This was enough to strike fear into the people of the royal city. Back then, some people had linked the Yanjiao people to the previous divination results and suggested that Yanjiao was a threat, but most people did not believe it. But now, after hearing the fox chief's words, the Yi family began to plan. The next day, the head of the Yi family went to the palace to discuss with the king and the other aristocrats. To them, if there was a threat, they had to nip it in the bud. They could not give it a chance to grow. When that young man from Yanjiao destroyed the royal city gates, some people had already begun to speculate. Now, there was an even bigger problem. The Yanjiao people can predict the weather more accurately. Forget about the weather. Can the Yanjiao people really fight against a beast king? This was something to be wary of. With such a dangerous tribe around, they could not help but feel uneasy when they thought about the divination conclusion that the world will be divided after a long time and the world will be united after a long time. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was heavy. Once a cloud of suspicion formed in one's heart, it would be difficult to disperse. This was especially true for those who had been suspicious for a long time. Now that they finally found a suspected breakthrough, they would definitely not give up. If the Yanjiao people knew what these people were talking about, they would probably vomit blood. Bullshit. If they could fight against the Beast King, why would they give up so much high-quality salt and fire crystals? However, once these people think you're a threat, it's hard to convince them otherwise. The cold winter will pass. This winter came early and ferociously, but it also left late. When the wind and snow finally stopped, when the sun finally broke through the thick dark clouds and shone on the earth, the people who had been gloomy for a long time looked up to the sky and roared. The weather turned sunny, and winter was officially over. The temperature rose quickly, not giving people enough time to adjust. The tribesmen were clearing the thick snow. In fact, most of it had already been cleared by Xiao Xian. In most places, the snow was knee-deep. These were all cleared by Xiao Xian when he was practicing. The densely populated areas were also cleaned every day, so they did not have to deal with the melting snow. Water was dripping from the eaves, and everywhere in the tribe was wet. The patrolling warriors were reluctant to leave as they watched the ice brick sentry post slowly melt. They had not had enough fun, but relatively speaking, they still preferred warmer weather. That way, they could go out and hunt. The melting snow made the river in front of the tribe rise a lot. The people near the foot of the mountain had to move up. There was a lot of water in many places in the forest. It was inconvenient to go out and hunt. However, the large amount of stagnant water also caused some animals to come out of their burrows to hide. The soldiers also encountered many small beasts as they walked around the area. The ducks that had been frozen all winter rushed out of the duck shed. They were not afraid of the cold. They jumped into the river or flew into the forest. The person who took care of the duck shed finally saw the fat duck. The fat duck walked out with a group of similar-looking green furballs. It looked at everyone with caution, but did not attack. 31. Not one is missing, the person said happily. Hey, what are the ducklings eating? Xiao Xian looked over. It's probably an earthworm. Before Xiao Xian could finish the word earthworm, he saw a thumb-sized worm being pecked by the green furry balls. It opened its mouth full of sharp teeth. Probably an insect that crawled out from the ground. Xiao Xian could only say so. He did not know what these earthworm-like insects were called. They had never crawled out before. Now, they were probably forced out by the melting snow. There were also some wriggling or crawling insects that came out from the river in front of the tribe. The river rose and flooded what used to be the ground. Now, these insects were scrambling to climb higher. This was a great advantage for the ducks. The fat duck led the 31 green furballs to peck at the rising river. They ate what the other ducks ate. They ate what the other ducks did not eat. With this group of ducks, the people in the tribe did not have to kill the insects themselves. The ducks jumped around the river bank. Some even fought for food. The weather turned warm quickly. Yesterday, they were still wearing thick furs. Today, they only wore their usual hunting clothes. The people who worked were sweating all over. This weather is too strange, said Xiao Xian. He did not know what this weather change meant. Since the weather was really warm, winter was over. The tribe would hold their annual ceremony. However, the shamaness was distracted. Not only was she distracted, but so was Chief Xing Luo. He often stood at the top of the mountain and looked into the distance. Xiao Xian knew that they were waiting for news. They were waiting for the people who left in winter to bring back good news. Even if they did not make it this time, what if the next winter was the same? Then they could seize the opportunity. However, Xiao Xian had a feeling that the shamaness and the chief's plan might not work. 2 days later, all the snow in the tribe was cleared. The wet ground was much drier after 3 days of sun. The river receded quickly too. No one knew where the water went. The river in front of the tribe was connected to another river outside. It was blocked by something, so the dangerous creatures in the other river could not come over. However, the water flowed. Now, the rising river was obviously receding every day. In a few days, it would reach the water level before winter. That night, the ceremony went on as usual. The people who were sent out in winter had not returned. This was within everyone's expectations. It took time to travel, and it took even longer to travel in the snow. This year's ceremony was especially quiet. The shamaness and the chief were not in the mood. Those who knew were also distracted. However, for the ceremony and to respect their ancestors, they temporarily put aside their emotions. Even if they wanted to think about something, they would have to wait until the ceremony was over. As the shamaness chanted, the flames in the fire pit rose. The heat of the flames chased away the remaining chill of the night. Xiao Xian's bone ornaments also reacted. They were almost connected to the flames in the fire pit. The rising flames gradually formed a flame giant. The tribe was no longer surprised by the appearance of this flame giant. However, this time, the flame giant gave Xiao Xian a different feeling. The power of inheritance in his body did not run wild. In other words, the flame giant's appearance was the result of the bone ornament's own power. It was similar to the previous ceremonies. It was not under Xiao Xian's control. After seeing the flame giant, the people in the tribe all knelt down. Even the most arrogant warriors and the elders who liked to throw tantrums knelt down respectfully. Especially the warriors who went to the salt mines with Zheng Luo. They were especially pious. Without the protection of their ancestors, they would not have been able to escape from the king beast. Xiao Xian looked up at the flame giant in the sky. At this time last year, the flame giant slowly turned and stood in the direction Xiao Xian had come from. Today, the flame giant also turned and faced the familiar direction. The difference was that after turning, it raised an arm and pointed in that direction. Many people in the tribe saw this. Those who had lowered their heads also looked up in the direction of the flame giant. What was the ancestor hinting at? The shamaness was shocked. She stood by the fire pit in a daze, looking at the flame giant in the sky. Only when the flame giant disappeared did the shamaness continue the ceremony. When the ceremony was over, everyone dispersed. They discussed the meaning of the ancestor pointing in that direction during the ceremony. By the fire pit. After the ceremony, only a small flame was left in the fire pit. It was not bright. The shamaness was still standing there. Xiao Xian, did you hear that? Asked the shamaness. Hear what? Xiao Xian was confused. The ancestor's voice. The shamaness closed her eyes. What did the ancestor say? Xiao Xian asked. The shamaness did not speak. After a moment of silence, she said, "It's time to go back." Xiao Xian looked at the shamaness in surprise. He was sure that the shamaness was serious. You plan to move? That's right. The ancestor's appearance just now was an indication, said the shamaness. But how do we get there? Don't we have to wait for Xiang Chen to bring back news? Xiao Xian asked. Xiang Chen might not bring back good news. The shamaness sighed. But the ancestor is telling us that it's time to go back. That was what the shamaness thought. Since the ancestor said it was time to go back, then it was time to act. As for what method to use, they had to think of it themselves. However, the shamaness did not think that the ancestor was making things difficult for them. Perhaps the ancestor already had a way. They just didn't know about it. Xiao Xian was thinking about the shamaness words when he sensed something. He looked up and saw the shamaness staring at him. Why are you looking at me? The shamaness smiled. Maybe the ancestor will tell you the way to leave. That would depend on the ancestor's spirit. Xiao Xian thought to himself. At the same time, on the other side of the sea, in the fearsome beast forest, in the Yanjiao tribe, the old shamaness stood by the fire pit. She looked at the fire seed in the fire pit and thought about the flame giant that had appeared during the ceremony. The giant raised an arm and pointed in the direction it was facing. What did this mean? The old man stood there for a long time, enjoying the night breeze. Chapter 480. 2 days after the ceremony, someone from the Mountain Wind tribe hurried over. It was their chief. Where's your chief? I need to talk to him. The Mountain Wind chief asked a Yanjiao patrol to bring him to Zheng Luo. If Zheng Luo isn't here, your elder is fine too. Ever since the salt mine incident, the Mountain Wind tribesmen were more cautious of Yanjiao's young elder. They did not underestimate him. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian, they would not have been able to return safely. The chief and elder are here. The patrol sent someone to report and brought the Mountain Wind tribesmen up the mountain. After the salt mine incident, Yanjiao and Mountain Wind tribesmen got along a little better. Seeing Lanmu's serious expression, it seemed like there was something very important. The guide did not waste any time and hurried up the mountain. According to tradition, after winter and the ceremony, they would welcome the first hunt of the year. In previous years, the important people of the tribe would gather at the top of the mountain for a meeting to prepare for the hunt. Today, they were gathered as well. However, they were not discussing the hunt, but other things. The shamaness told everyone about the instructions she received at the ceremony. She also mentioned her idea. However, they did not know how to leave just yet, so the meeting froze halfway through. No one was willing to migrate the entire tribe before finding a solution. There were too many variables. This was not a joke, and they could not afford to do so. Just then, someone came to report that the Mountain Wind Chief had come personally. It seemed like something important had happened. Zheng Luo told the others to go back and think about it. They would continue the meeting tomorrow. The frequency of meetings had increased significantly since winter. Seeing Lanmu, Zheng Luo's heart sank. He knew that Mountain Wind had been planning to attack the Fox tribe after the snow ended. If the Fox tribesmen did not return safely from the salt mine, the Fox tribe would be greatly weakened and Mountain Wind would have a chance to strike. However, seeing Lanmu's expression, it did not seem like something good had happened. Did the Fox tribesmen return safely too? What? Did something happen at the Fox tribe? Asked Zheng Luo. More than that. Lanmu sat down and told Zheng Luo what he knew. During the winter, after we returned, we did not send anyone over to check on the Fox tribe situation due to the snowstorm. A few days ago, we thought that winter was about to end, so we sent someone over to check. Who would have thought that the Fox people were migrating? There were too few people who went to investigate, so we didn't stop them directly. We didn't have a chance to kill them at all. By the time we got there, most of the people there had already evacuated. There were only a few injured people who couldn't walk anymore. Ranmu was angry when he said this. He had been preparing for this for the whole winter, and now he had encountered this situation. Where did the Fox people move to? Asked Zheng Luo. Lanmu glanced at Xiao Xian, who was sitting next to him. Royal City. They're going to the Royal City. This was what he had forced out of the few injured personnel who had been left behind. Royal City. They joined the Royal City. Zheng Luo was surprised. It seems that not many people from the salt mines returned safely. Otherwise, they wouldn't have migrated to the Royal City so easily. That's right. According to what I heard, less than 20 Shan tribesmen returned from the salt mines. They were all heavily injured too. The Fox tribesmen probably aren't any better. But get to the point. Xiao Xian, who had been quiet all this while, spoke up. What Lanmu knew must have something to do with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept glancing at them. Lanmu paused. I heard that Elder Xiao Xian went to the Royal City before winter. Yes, answered Xiao Xian. The 6 major cities issued a bounty for the capture of the Yanjiao tribesmen. I heard it's because of the destruction of the Royal City's walls. When Lanmu first heard the news, he was surprised. The Yanjiao tribesmen were too strong. They even destroyed the Royal City's walls. The Mountain Wind tribe was relatively well informed. Their tribe was located on the outskirts of the forest. He didn't know how they got the news so quickly. It could have been a bird or something else. In any case, the Mountain Wind tribe was a cut above the rest when it came to information. Since Lanmu said so, it was most likely true. You want to attack the Yanjiao tribe just by destroying their walls? Said Zheng Luo angrily. That's a far-fetched reason. Their walls aren't strong enough. One touch and it breaks. You're blaming us for being strong. Lanmu's face twitched. What did he mean by one touch and it breaks? That's the Royal City's walls, not your backyard's fence. If it were me, I'd be afraid too. Rumor has it that the weather changed this past winter because of the Yanjiao tribe. I also heard. Lanmu glanced at Zheng Luo and the others' sour expressions. He continued, I also heard that the Yanjiao tribesmen lured out a king beast that lives in the snow. It'll bring about an even greater disaster. Bullshit. Zheng Luo's face darkened. Why was the Yanjiao tribesman taking all the blame? You believe that? I don't. But there must be other reasons. It might have something to do with the Fox tribe, or something else. But the news about them attacking you must be true. I came as soon as I heard the news. After all, he'd experienced it himself. If the Yanjiao tribesmen really had something to do with the king beast, would they have been in such a sorry state? But to say they had nothing to do with it. Lanmu still doubted it. After all, only one person knew how they'd escaped from the king beast and what had happened after they'd fainted. Thinking of this, Lanmu glanced at Xiao Xian again suspiciously. His eyes met Xiao Xian's and Lanmu's heart skipped a beat. He quickly looked away. He didn't want to provoke this young man now. Who knew which idiot's idea was to blame the Yanjiao tribesmen for the weather change? How could a tribe affect the weather so easily? Were the people who believed that idiots? But there were many who believed it and treated the Yanjiao tribesmen like the plague. Lanmu only told them what he knew as a way of thanking Yanjiao for their help at the salt mines. Before he left, Lanmu thought about it and asked, "You Yanjiao people really came from somewhere else?" Zheng Luo's eyelid twitched. Clearly, this was the most important reason why the others were targeting Yanjiao. Their Yanjiao tribe didn't belong to this land. It was just that thousands of years had passed and many people had forgotten. Many people thought the Yanjiao tribe came from somewhere else but didn't know that 1,000 years ago, they didn't even exist here. Lanmu opened his mouth but in the end, he shook his head and sighed. You all should be careful. It seemed to be a natural instinct to exclude others. Back then, the Yanjiao tribe left the crowded areas and settled here for two reasons. 1, they liked the living environment here. 2, they wanted people to forget Yanjiao's origins. The ancestral records said that when the Yanjiao people first arrived, they were ostracized and lost many people. Were they going to experience it again? After Lanmu left, Xiang Chen and the others finally returned with similar news. Amba City had already posted a notice saying that the Yanjiao people had been demonized. When Xiang Chen and the others were hiding, they even heard people talking about Yanjiao's strength. Was it wrong for them to be strong? Xiao Xian didn't know how many people believed the rumors, but Xiao Xian was sure that if there was a reward and a secret leak about the salt and fire crystals, there would be even more people willing to go. These people were planning to slowly encroach on the Flaming Horn tribe's power. They didn't plan to attack them directly. If the Great Six wanted to attack Yanjiao, they didn't have to do it themselves. They knew that Yanjiao wasn't easy to deal with. This was a good time for the greedy and dependent to make contributions. Also, they heard that the royal city had taken in many people during the winter and gave them so many benefits. Would the slave masters really do that? In the forest, due to competition, the tribes didn't interact much. The only good collaborator was the neighboring Taiha tribe. The mountain wind people were just returning the favor and didn't want to get involved. But it was understandable. It's time to leave. The shamaness got up and walked outside. She stood on the peak of the mountain and looked at the budding trees in the distance. Rather than wait for people to come and provoke them, it was better to leave now. Their ancestors' instructions couldn't be wrong. Zheng Luo called for an emergency meeting. Not long after, the entire tribe was mobilized. Zheng Luo took the time to visit the neighboring Taiha tribe's chief. Since Lanmu had come to Yanjiao, he would naturally go to the nearby Taiha tribe to say goodbye. That was why the Taiha chief already knew about Yanjiao's current situation. He thought that Zheng Luo had come to ask for help. After being neighbors for so many years, the Taiha people were willing to help. He didn't expect Zheng Luo to come to say goodbye. Knowing that the Taiha people were willing to help, Zheng Luo was already very grateful. They had been neighbors for so many years. They had quarreled, fought, but in the end, it was still this neighbor who was willing to help them. Perhaps this was the reason why their overbearing ancestors were willing to be neighbors with the Taiha people. After thanking him, Zheng Luo told him why he was here. I'm here to say goodbye. Zheng Luo looked at his old rival who was much older than him. Leave. The Taihe chief almost dropped the bronze cup he used to show off. What did he mean? Was he afraid of being targeted by the 6 tribes? Was he going to hide in a more secluded place? The Yanjiao people they knew weren't this cowardly. Aren't they just a bunch of arrogant nobles? If we build our own city, we can call ourselves nobles too. Why should we be afraid of them? Don't care what they say, just pretend they're talking nonsense. At most, we won't leave the forest. In the forest, we still have the advantage, said the Taihe chief unhappily. We're from another continent, said Zheng Luo. I know. What does it matter where we're from? Could it be that you don't dare to fight? The Taihe chief didn't think it was a big deal. It was rare to have a neighbor and they didn't want to lose him. Who would help them carry things when they went on a trade trip? No, we're just going back. Although Zheng Luo didn't know why the shaman was so confident, he just had to believe in her. Go back. What did she mean? The Taihe chief didn't understand until Zheng Luo left. Chapter 481. It had been hundreds of years since the ancestors of the tribe came here. They had fought for a piece of land and lived here until now. It had been passed down from one generation to the next. They knew every detail of the houses and the cultivation of the fields. Every place had a history and memory. When they heard that they were going to pack up and leave, the people in the tribe were shocked. They didn't know how to react and just followed their leader's orders. When they came back to their senses, they started talking. When they heard that the nobles from the 6 tribes were going to attack their tribe, they were furious. Some of the warriors wanted to fight them, but Duo Kong heard them and beat them up. You think we're afraid? Bullshit. Why would we Yanjiao be afraid of those arrogant slave masters? The reason we're leaving is because we're going back. Duo Kong said loudly. The people who were packing up stopped in their tracks. Go back. Go back where? What did their leader mean? The warrior who was beaten up by Duo Kong forgot to get up and asked, Leader, aren't we right here? Where are we going? We're going back to where our ancestors came from. Duo Kong left after saying that. He still had to go down the mountain to inspect other places. Because of the departure, the whole tribe was a little anxious. In order to prevent the energetic warriors from making trouble because they didn't get to hunt, he had to calm them down. The bruised warrior on the ground looked at Duo Kang's back as he left. He dug at the dried ground and thought about Duo Kang's words. We're going back to where our ancestors came from. Where our ancestors came from. Shao Xian. He heard that Shao Xian came from there too. Did that mean they were going to the legendary birthplace of the Yanjiao tribe? Xiang Chen and the others had just returned to the tribe. Initially, they were disheartened by the fact that the sea had yet to freeze. After hearing the bad rumors about the Flaming Horn tribe, they wanted to fight it out with these people. They didn't expect things to turn out this way. The Yanjiao people were sick. Xiang Chen had heard about this from his father a long time ago. They just didn't talk about it. If other people said that the Yanjiao people were sick, he would definitely scold them back. You're the one who's sick, your entire tribe is sick. However, that was the truth of the matter. After scolding him, Xiang Chen began to wonder when he would recover from his illness. But now the opportunity had come. Although he didn't know what the shamaness was thinking, since the shamaness and the chief had decided to leave, he would do the same. What about the duck shed? The person taking care of the ducks was reluctant to let them go. He ran over and asked Shao Xian. Just leave them there. Leave the duck shed to them. In the future, if they want to leave, they can leave. If they want to stay here, then let them stay. These ducks were too ordinary, and the people in the tribe didn't care for them. It was troublesome to bring them along. Should they kill them and roast them? He might as well hunt a few ferocious beasts to satisfy himself. Those duck eggs were the protection fee for these ducks. How many eggs did we pick up today? What should we do? The man asked again. Cook them and bring them along. Where's the green duck? The man asked expectantly. Xiao Xian looked at the fat duck that was swimming in the river with a flock of green feathers. Xiao Xian couldn't wait for these green eggs. However, the duck eggs had helped the Yinjiao before, so Xiao Xian didn't kill them. Don't worry about it. The copper cauldron had already been smelted into other copper products. There were pots and kettles, which were distributed to the tribe's meritorious members. They couldn't bear to throw them away and planned to keep them with them. The salt had been successfully refined. Most of it was distributed to the people in the tribe, while the shamanists kept the rest. The grains and herbs were also distributed within a day. The people in the tribe were so busy that they didn't have time to think about anything else, let alone feel sad. Xiao Xian had experienced a big migration before. This was the second one, but the situation was slightly different. This time, there were many people who were hostile towards them. Perhaps it wouldn't be as smooth as the first one. Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo had discussed the migration route. Xiang Chen's route could no longer be used. Someone must have seen the Yinjiao on that route. Perhaps someone had already set up an ambush, waiting for the Yinjiao to come knocking on their door. That route would also pass by several cities. They could use it in the past because it was convenient for them to resupply. Now, they had to avoid it. In comparison, Xiao Xian's route was much safer because it avoided places with many people. Perhaps there were dangers in the forest, but that route was the shortest. Plus, there were so many people. If they encountered a fierce beast, everyone could work together to fend it off. Let's go with this one. Zheng Luo's finger tapped on Xiao Xian's map. First, send someone to scout out the situation in the forest. Clear the path. That night, when most of the people in the tribe couldn't sleep, Xiao Xian had a dream. He dreamed of the first shaman of the tribe. He couldn't see the shaman's face clearly, only a blurry figure. But Xiao Xian had a special feeling that he was sure of this person's identity. The legendary first shaman of the Yinjiao tribe, and the original owner of the 6 bone ornaments. In Xiao Xian's dream, he saw the shaman walking down a long and narrow path, step by step, walking into the distance. That path was familiar. The surroundings were dark, and there was the sound of flowing water. Beside him, there were some vague, large figures moving slowly, like giant beasts in the sea. His eyes flew open. Xiao Xian was still in a daze, but the scene in the dream was still vivid. Every detail was crystal clear, except for that blurry figure. Outside the window, it was already dawn. Light could be seen through the wooden window. Getting up, Xiao Xian quickly rinsed his mouth with cold water, wiped his face, and ran to find the shaman without eating breakfast. Early in the morning, the shaman wasn't in the house. She stood by the fire pit, staring blankly at it. In the past night, the shaman didn't sleep at all. She stood by the fire pit for the whole night. Although her face was calm, there were obvious dark circles under her eyes. Under her drooping eyelids, her eyes were bloodshot. Perhaps the shaman wasn't as calm as she looked. After all, the tribe's migration was a big deal. She and the chief were under a lot of pressure to make this decision. Seeing Xiao Xian, the shaman asked, "What's the hurry?" "There's something I don't understand," said Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian told her about his dream last night. He didn't know if it was a hint from the ancestors, or if he was overthinking it. After hearing Xiao Xian's story, the shaman's listless eyes lit up. She squinted slightly, and the wrinkles on her face deepened. "That's the path. It's the path the ancestors showed us. Maybe when we get there, it'll turn into what you saw. Then the path will be formed," said the shaman with certainty. She believed the ancestors wouldn't lie to them. But don't worry, it's definitely a hint from the ancestors. But, before Xiao Xian could finish, the shaman raised her hand to stop Xiao Xian. You have to believe in the ancestors. I do, said Xiao Xian helplessly. Then it's fine. All we need to do is bring the tribesmen there. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, the shaman felt much better. She decided to talk to Zheng Luo. Zheng Luo was probably under a lot of pressure, so he didn't sleep at all. Early in the morning, she heard Zheng Luo lecturing the tribesmen. Seeing the shaman leave quickly, Xiao Xian scratched his head. He didn't think he'd encounter the same situation as last time. In his dream, he didn't encounter the sound of flowing water or the huge figures. 2 days later, the tribe gathered. The scouting team had returned. They could walk through the forest, but there were puddles in some places. They had to be careful. On the mountain, the fire pit was still there, but without the Yanjiao tribesmen, the fire pit had lost its purpose. The house was still there, but no one lived there. It was empty and lonely. In the fields, some weeds had sprouted. The crops hadn't been planted, so the tribesmen had to give up on this opportunity and save the seeds. In the man-made river that was dug around the mountain, ducks of different colors and sizes were swimming in it. The temperature was rising quickly, the water was already warm. The ducks were lively after a harsh winter. Are we really leaving these for the Taiha people? Duo Kong couldn't bear to leave them. But after they left, this place would be ownerless. They didn't want to give it to anyone else, so they could only give it to the Taiha tribe. They're lucky. I hope they don't eat all the ducks, said someone who used to live near the duck shed. I don't care about the others, but I can't bear to leave those green ducks behind. The duck shed keeper kept looking back. The long line of people left. The fat duck in the river looked at them quietly. It was confused, but it had no intention of following them. It only watched as the last person in the line crossed the bridge before turning back to swim with the other ducklings. When the line passed by the Taiha tribe, Xiao Xian saw a group of people waiting there. Most of them were from the hunting team. They were familiar with each other, including Quan Bai and the others who stayed with the Yanjiao tribe for a long time when they planted the 1,000-grain gold. They were here to send them off. This was the last time they saw each other. Whether it was the Yanjiao people or the Taiha people, they were all reluctant to part. Take these with you. The Taiha chief took out 2 large cloth bags. They were filled with the herbs they'd rushed to produce in the past 2 days. Take care. Thank you, take care. Zheng Luo patted the Taiha chief's shoulder. Right, don't eat those green ducks over there. Take care of them. You'll be rewarded. Xiao Xian should have told you, right? Asked Zheng Luo. I know. Don't worry, said the Taiha chief. Why did that sound so awkward? They didn't hesitate anymore. They gave the 2 sides a short time to leave. 2 old people knelt and cried. There were Yanjiao people who had married into the Taiha tribe. There were also Taiha people who had married into the Yanjiao tribe. There hadn't been any intermarriage in recent years, but there were still some who were still alive. They wanted to leave with the Yanjiao, but they were already very old. They would only be a burden if they followed the team. The shaman raised his hand and patted them on the head. Stay. The line set off again, gradually leaving this place where they'd lived for hundreds of years. Zheng Luo looked back in the direction of the hill. The tall trees blocked his view. He looked back, his steps firm as he walked at the front of the line. Their ancestors said that one day, the Yanjiao people who left would return to their homeland. This was the day their generation met. Chapter 482. Roar. A mournful roar echoed through the forest. After the sound of metal clashing, the roar finally stopped, and the heavy breathing gradually calmed down. Xiao Xian pulled a leaf from the side and wiped the blood off his sword. The soldiers next to him went over to deal with the beast that had just been killed. They opened the kettle and poured the blood into it. If it was in the past, they would try their best to keep the animal skin intact after killing the prey. But now, they no longer needed that, and the animal skin would not be hoarded for trade. All they needed was food, and this ferocious beast had become the warriors' lunch. 7 or 8 people dealt with the beast at the same time. They removed the organs, cut off the meat, and left the skin and bones where they were. Duo Kong passed over a kettle filled with beast blood. "Drink some." Xiao Xian waved his hand. "No, I didn't use much. Give it to the other soldiers." Duo Kong grinned and didn't say much. He took a gulp and passed it to the others. The slightly viscous liquid with a strong smell of blood flowed down his esophagus and into his stomach. The energy that he had spent in the morning was gradually replenished, and he felt a little warm. Sweat seeped out of his pores. Duo Kong pulled a few tender leaves from the side and rubbed his hands to get rid of the coagulated blood clots on his hands. "It's been 2 days, and we haven't met anyone chasing after us." Duo Kong looked at Xiao Xian and waited for Xiao Xian to give him some information. He saw Xiao Xian playing with a straw rope in the morning. Xiao Xian wouldn't be so bored as to play with a straw rope at a time like this. He must be doing some divination. Duo Kong had been leading the team to guard their surroundings, so he didn't have time to ask. Now that he finally had the chance, he came over to ask. "We'll meet them soon. Not everyone thinks we'll go back the way we came, and not everyone will choose to ambush us. Some will take the initiative to attack. Maybe someone can predict our route," Xiao Xian said. "They can even predict our route?" Duo Kong was shocked. He didn't believe it, but thinking about the Yi family, it was possible. Although the Yi family had a lot of useless people, there were still some capable people. "What are your plans?" Duo Kong asked again. "Let's just continue on our way. By the way, have you guys finished the things I asked you to do?" Xiao Xian asked. Before they set off, Xiao Xian assigned some tasks to the warriors who were a little more relaxed. With the elderly and children in tow, the journey would definitely not be as fast as when they were hunting, so naturally, some of them would be free. Xiao Xian gave them some time to help with some small tasks. "I made a lot. They are all over there." Duo Kong pointed to a rattan basket not far away. "That's good. You guys can leave first. I'll stay behind to set up this place." Xiao Xian walked over and opened the lid of the rattan basket. He was very satisfied with the items inside. Duo Kong thought of what Xiao Xian had done when they went to Amba City to trade and encountered the young master of Amba City who had sent people to kill them. He didn't ask any more questions. He called the other warriors who had finished dealing with the beasts to quickly pack up and continue on their way. Xiang Chen saw that Xiao Xian was alone at the back and asked Duo Kong curiously, "Elder, you're not leaving?" "Our elder has something to do." Duo Kong gestured for Xiang Chen to quickly return to the group. Xiang Chen's head was full of questions. He didn't go with Duo Kong to trade, so he didn't know what happened. Even if he heard about it from others, he didn't have a deep impression of it. He returned to the group and picked up his younger daughter, carried his wife on his back, and hung the other things around his neck or waist. Then, Xiang Chen, like the others, continued on their way. Soon, the place that was filled with the smell of blood quieted down. The humid and warm air carried the smell of blood. In the distance, the roars of beasts could be heard. Xiao Xian looked up at the sky. Through the cover of the leaves, he could see some flying figures flying back and forth. The scavenger birds couldn't wait any longer. The first one swooped down, broke through the leaves, and headed straight for the remains of the beast on the ground. Xiao Xian slashed it to the ground with his sword. After a few twitches, it died. The other scavenger birds saw this and turned in the air. They rested on the branches not far away and stared at Xiao Xian. More than 20 scavenger birds flew down and rested not far away, staring at Xiao Xian. There were even more in the sky. Xiao Xian was the only one in the area. If it had been someone less brave, they would have been scared. Xiao Xian ignored them. He busied himself around the remains of the beast for a while, slapping a few of the scavenger birds that wanted to attack him to the ground. When he was done, he left and continued to set up traps around the area. Xiao Xian planned to set up another trap. He had asked the soldiers to help him set up traps. There would definitely be pursuers behind him. Even if he couldn't rely on these traps to block all of them, he could at least cause them some damage and delay them. This would also slow down the pursuers. Seeing Xiao Xian leave the beast's corpse, the scavenger birds waiting on the branches rushed up. Many feathers fell as they fought. Because the Yinjiao team had just arrived, the large beasts had already left the area. For the time being, there wouldn't be anything to fight with these scavenger birds for food. The scavenger birds pecked at the remains of the beast's flesh and blood. They blinked their gray eyelids and bit on the bloody meat strands. They were on guard against Xiao Xian. From time to time, they would spread their wings and extend their necks at Xiao Xian. They were trying to drive away Xiao Xian and prevent him from stealing their food. However, Xiao Xian didn't plan to pay any attention to them. He continued with his work. A greenish-gray vine that was thinner than a pinky finger was entwined in the inconspicuous grass. If someone familiar with the forest saw it, they would definitely be on guard. This was because this vine was not found in the vicinity. It was a vine that lived in the swamps. It was thin and tough. Sharp wooden thorns and polished stone needles were hidden by leaves. In less than half an hour, a basket of vines had been hidden nearby. By the time he was done, only skin and bones were left of the beast's corpse. Most of the meat had been cleaned up. The huge beast was now only a pile of skin, bones, and hard teeth. Xiao Xian stood up, glanced around the place, and then left. Taiha tribe. A group of Taiha warriors chased away the sneaky people in the forest. They even killed 2 of them. How many waves has it been? Is it the 3rd wave or the 4th? A warrior asked. Good thing the Yinjiao people left quickly. Otherwise, it would be so annoying. In the past 2 days, they often encountered people loitering in the nearby forest, especially around the Yinjiao tribe. They had taken over Yinjiao's territory, so they naturally had to send people to guard it and chase away anyone who wanted to get close. Those people seemed to be small groups. They didn't dare to offend the Taiha people. When they saw that the Yinjiao tribe was almost empty, they gave up and went to look for traces of the Yinjiao people in the forest. Some people even wanted to threaten the Taiha people, but this was Taiha territory. They didn't manage to threaten anyone. Instead, they were dragged up the mountain to be used as fertilizer. The sun was setting. At dusk, a group of about 100 people followed the trail. After all, there were so many Yinjiao people. It was impossible for them to not leave any traces behind. For those who were familiar with the area, it was easy to distinguish them. They were the first group of people to catch up. After going to the vicinity of the Flaming Horns tribe to inquire, they didn't stop to follow the trail. They wanted to get some benefits before others. Although there were only about 100 people, they didn't plan to fight head-on. Instead, they planned to kidnap some people and use them as hostages. Then they could threaten the Yinjiao people with fire crystals and salt. They had used this method many times on other people. Compared to fighting head-on, it was much smarter. This time, they were full of confidence. Beast carcasses. They passed by here not long ago, said one of them. They approached the carcasses. They wanted to judge the strength of the people who killed them from the carcasses. They also wanted to know the approximate time since the carcasses were killed. This would allow them to estimate the opponent's strength and the time it would take to catch up. However, when the people who went to check on the beast's carcass poked at the beast's bones, which had been pecked clean, a strange change occurred. Buzz, with a rapid trembling sound, as if a chaotic switch had been pressed, the tranquil forest was suddenly filled with murderous intent. The large area of effect stone needles were like rain. Those who tried to dodge would accidentally trigger another round of traps. Every time they thought that they had finally dodged, they would be greeted with another round of attacks, round after round. The noose was like a big hand that suddenly emerged from the ground and tied up those who couldn't escape in time. Those who moved slowly were accidentally pierced by wood and stone needles. When all the chaos finally stopped, those who were still alive didn't dare to move. They looked around vigilantly. Their nerves were tense with every step they took. Some people on the ground were groaning. They were poisoned and trapped. Even if they survived, they couldn't continue to chase for the time being. Although there were only about 20 people who lost their ability to move, 8 of them were dead. The remaining 70 or so were only slightly injured. However, they didn't dare to chase at full speed like before. Fortunately, they were alert enough to dodge quickly. Otherwise, at least half of them would be lying here. "Boss, should we continue to chase?" A man's face was twisted as he pulled out a wooden thorn from his arm. It was obviously made of wood, but it was such a big threat. The poison on the thorn made his entire arm numb. He applied some medicine and felt better, but he didn't know if it would continue to work. If the poison was too strong, he didn't know if his arm would be crippled. The leader was also alarmed. They hadn't received any information before, so their understanding of the Yanjiao people was limited to strength and arrogance. They didn't expect to suffer such a big loss just as they were about to catch up. "Take the injured people away first. We won't chase for now," the leader said. "What if the fire crystals and salt are taken by others? Then let them take it first. I'd like to see what other methods the Yanjiao people will use to deal with those behind us." They were at a disadvantage this time because they didn't understand the Yanjiao people. They couldn't blindly chase after them. If they fell into the enemy's trap, only death would await them. After all, they had so few people. They wouldn't be able to get anything, but their own side would be wiped out. If they wanted to experiment, they should let others do it. Chapter 483. When the Flaming Horn tribesmen who were waiting for an ambush on the route that the Flaming Horn tribesmen often took were about to lose their patience. While some people were chasing after the trail in the forest, there was another group of people who took another route. The people in metal armor walked in a line. The people at the front were riding tall horses. These horses were of a carefully selected breed and had been well taken care of. They were very spirited. Their big hooves stomped on the ground, making pang 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 sounds. Even the stones on the road were easily crushed. The horses galloped together like rolling thunder. The people riding on the tall horses held bronze spears in their hands. The spears glowed with a cold light. Coupled with the cold face of the person holding the spear, the people passing by could feel a chill from afar. The coldest winter had passed and the temperature had risen a lot, but when they saw these people, they still couldn't help but shiver and feel a chill down their backs. Because people often walked on this road, there were fewer weeds and no trees in the way. The ground was flat, making it convenient for carriages and horses. The tribe's trading teams often came and went on this road. However, the width of this road was limited. When the caravans passed by, they had to rearrange their formation. It was impossible for two teams to pass at the same time. Unless one side avoided it and walked on the side with grass, rocks, and pits. In front of them was a traveling caravan from an unknown tribe. The people riding horses at the front of the caravan squeezed their horses' bellies, shook the spears in their hands, and rushed forward with a whoosh. The sharp spears pierced through the air, and the sound was like the whimpering of the cold wind, piercing the people in front of them. "Dodge! Dodge!" The people in the caravan shouted and drove the carriages and beasts to the side. The people also hurried to the side. They could only dodge when faced with such a group. Seeing this group, the people in the caravan felt a sense of fear. No matter how much courage they had, it would be completely extinguished when faced with such a group. Under such an attack, they could only dodge. The cold air hit them in the face. Before the spears reached them, the murderous aura was already there. If they didn't dodge, they would definitely face these people. They came too quickly. Because the caravan was in a hurry to dodge, a wooden cart piled with goods was almost overturned by a rock. Some goods fell to the ground, but the people in the caravan didn't care about the fallen goods. A young man in the group wanted to pick them up, but an elder grabbed his clothes and dragged him to the side. Rumble, the person on the horse had already arrived. The spear that was thrust out with a slightly cold air, brushing past the side of the young man who was being dragged by the elder. His exposed skin was scraped by the murderous air current, causing goosebumps to appear all over his body. The closer he got, the more he could feel how terrifying they were. This kind of aura, this kind of impact that wanted to sweep everything away, made the young man, who was struggling to pick up the dropped items, freeze like a stone. It seemed that if he moved even a little more, he would be smashed into pieces by this kind of aura. To these people who were rushing over on their horses, everything in their way, whether it was a person or an object, was their enemy. Anyone who stood in the way would be killed. The object was destroyed. The spear in the hands of the person at the front suddenly tilted downwards. The body of the spear shook along with the wrist of the person holding the spear, making a strange whining sound, like the low growl of a fierce beast before biting. Bang! The goods that fell on the ground were swept to the side by the spearhead. Because the spearhead was swung with too much force, it even had a tearing and destructive power. The linen cloth wrapped around the goods made a tearing sound, and the goods also scattered in the air, breaking into pieces of linen cloth and then drifting down. However, the people who were hiding at the side didn't dare to make a sound at this time. They didn't dare to check how many of the dropped goods were still in good condition, because once they got close, they would be mercilessly stabbed there. With that kind of aura and force, if a person bumped into it, where the spearhead stabbed, it would be broken. It was unknown whether they could even save their lives. After the horse riders rushed over, the ground was still trembling slightly, and the dust on the dirt road was raised high. The group behind didn't immediately come over, but stopped for a while, waiting for the smoke and dust to be blown away by the wind before the group leisurely passed by. During this period of time before the group arrived, the people who were hiding at the side didn't dare to set foot on this road, so they could only wait. When this group of people all passed by, they could then walk on the road. Otherwise, the scene just now would repeat itself. Didn't they see that the people who rushed over all stopped and stared at them? One of the people on the horse even held a spear and made a poking gesture at them, meaning to move away. If they dared to step on it, they would die. This was strength. If they were weaker than others, they could only stand aside. When the group of people with the shining armor and several giant beasts obediently pulled the carts away, the caravan at the side of the road trembled on the road. Those people just now, who were they? Someone in the caravan asked. Didn't you see the words on the flag? An elder said, those people should be from the royal city. Those nobles. With their formation, what are they going to do? This kind of group could destroy a city, which unlucky tribe provoked them. In the past, it was rare to see this group of nobles being serious. Who knows? The caravan once again set off, but the scene just now became a topic of discussion. Along the way, they discussed who those people were going to deal with. If they passed by a city, they would have to ask. On the other side, in the group that had just passed by, there were several carts pulled by giant beasts. The carriages were covered with patterned silk cloth. One of the carriages was pulled by a huge white, multi-horned rhinoceros-like beast. There were a few people in luxurious clothing sitting on a cushion in the middle. There was a young man sitting on the cushion, but the long hair hanging down from his temples was already silver white. At this time, the young man had a square wooden plate in front of him. On the plate were some diagrams that intersected with each other. 7 smooth white jade stones were placed on the plate, each of them glowing with a glossy light. Izong, what did the divination say? A young girl wearing exquisite leather armor couldn't help but ask. The man sitting on the cushion looked away from the plate and raised his hand to point in a direction. Over there, the Yinjiao people are still in the forest. They haven't stopped. What are the Yinjiao people doing? The girl in leather armor sat down dejectedly and looked in the direction Izong was pointing. Izong's divination skills were among the best in the Yi family. No one doubted his results. Could it be that they were scared by us? They were so scared that they moved. Maybe they're looking for a new place to settle down. But those tribesmen like to hide in the forest, another young man in the carriage said. Thinking of the complicated terrain and dense forest, as well as the possibility of encountering all kinds of poisonous insects, ferocious beasts, and even king beasts, they weren't stupid enough to kill their way into the forest. That was why they leaked the information from Izong's divination to other people who were interested. As long as the Yinjiao people dared to come out of the forest, they could directly kill them. It was best to let those people force the Yinjiao people to a remote place first. After the others had exhausted the Yinjiao forces, they could carry out the final cleanup. Fire crystals. Salt. Given the character of the Yinjiao people, they wouldn't give them away so easily. They would definitely keep them in their hands. At most, a small part of them would be taken away by those who chased after them first. Even if all the fire crystals and salt were taken away by those who chased after them first, they would only feel a little regret. After all, their main target this time was only the Yinjiao people. These people wanted to use the Yinjiao matter to gain merit. Since the fire seed disappeared, the cohesiveness of the tribes gradually weakened. There were scattered people. These people came from different tribes, and because of their interests or hobbies, they gathered together to form new forces. Among these forces, there were many who specialized in robbery or assassination. For example, the Green Peak, who were famous for robbing, or the Night Clan, who were famous for taking bribes to assassinate. Once these forces were attracted by a huge profit, they would become hungry wolves that smelled blood. They would pounce on the scent. Are the Yinjiao people really that scary? Someone asked. I know that. When that Yinjiao person sent the head of the Lu family flying with one blow, I was sitting in the tower at the city gate. At that time, the young man rattled on and on about what had happened. I heard that our ancestors had wanted to destroy the Yinjiao people for a long time. But the Yinjiao people were always hiding in the forest. Gradually, we forgot about this tribe. Only every time the Yinjiao people cause trouble, we remember. I heard that the Yinjiao people can control beast kings. Is that true? The girl in leather armor asked curiously. You believe that? Why not? Isn't that what everyone says? No, I have to call the head of the fox tribe over and ask him. The girl with the wallet pulled the curtain aside and gave some instructions to the people outside. Not long after, the chief of the fox tribe was brought over from the carriage behind. Once in the car, the head of the fox tribe felt uncomfortable. He used to be the head of the tribe, the boss. But now that he had come to the royal city, he felt inferior to these young people. After all, they were the best of the 6 noble families in the royal city. Greetings, young masters, the head of the fox tribe said, suppressing his discomfort. You're the head of the fox tribe? I heard that you were slaughtered by the Yinjiao people, the girl in leather armor asked. Veins popped on the head of the fox tribe. What did she mean by, slaughtered by the Yinjiao people? Weren't the people who had been brought into the royal city human? Also, what was with that tone of disdain? Was she looking down on them? Clenching his fists, the head of the fox tribe suppressed his anger inside. The Yinjiao people are indeed dangerous. With that, the head of the fox tribe repeated what he had prepared. He left out the details of the beast so that it sounded as if the Yinjiao people could really control the beast. Alright, you can go now. I got it. The girl in leather armor waved him away as if shooing away a fly. The head of the fox tribe took a deep breath and jumped out of the car. After the head of the fox tribe left, the girl's expression darkened. He's lying. I told you, the Yinjiao people aren't as scary as the rumors say. They're just exaggerating in order to deal with them. As for what happened at the city gate, it must be some secret technique. That Xiao Xian guy can't be that powerful. A young man leaned against the side with his arms crossed. Besides, so what if the head of the fox tribe is lying? As long as we get what we want. Flap flap flap. Outside the car, there was the sound of flapping wings. The people inside perked up. They lifted the curtains and let in a striped bird. There was a thin roll of animal skin in its claws. Carefully, the bird unfurled the skin and read the words on it. After reading it, Yizong said, "Don't count on Green Peak. They've leaked Yanjiao's general location to the Night Clan." Chapter 484. What's going on? Green Peak should have caught up with the Yanjiao by now. Aren't they supposed to be the fastest at tracking? Asked the girl in leather armor. Green Peak decided to postpone their pursuit, said Yizong. That was what the letter said. It wasn't that they couldn't catch up, but they were postponing their pursuit. The people of Green Peak were scared. The people of Green Peak had a special characteristic. If one of their tentacles was chopped off, they would retract all of their tentacles and watch quietly. So you're saying that Green Peak encountered something unexpected? Asked the young man next to him. What exactly was it that was out of his expectations? The people in the carriage couldn't imagine. Even Yizong couldn't get an answer through divination. We'll have to ask Green Peak in the future. In the forest. As they continued forward, the tribesmen were already far away from familiar places. Fortunately, Xiao Xian still remembered the place and drew a map from his memory for Jing Luo to refer to. If there wasn't anything special in this area, the tribesmen wouldn't come here. When Xiao Xian first met the Taiha people here, it was because they were chasing the long-clawed monkey. The journey that took Xiao Xian 2 days back then took the tribe almost 7 days to move. Fortunately, they got used to the rhythm of the journey and sped up a lot. We're almost at that mountain. Remember to prepare water, it'll get drier later, reminded Xiao Xian. After that, Xiao Xian sat on the side and took out a straw rope to perform divination. These days, he would perform divination every day. After all, he had so many people with him and it was related to the entire tribe. He couldn't be careless. Even if he didn't get anything, he would still try. In the past, continuous divination would cause him to feel exhausted due to exhaustion. However, it was unknown whether it was because he had trained to control the power of the bone ornaments or some other reason, but now, divination was much easier. However, many things could not be predicted by divination. The tribesmen were already used to Xiao Xian doing this every day. In fact, every time Xiao Xian took out the rope, Zheng Luo and Duo Kong would gather around and wait. After Xiao Xian finished tying the knot, Zheng Luo asked, "What did you get this time?" "We have to be careful tonight," Xiao Xian said. Zheng Luo's expression changed. Someone's coming tonight? In the past few days, they had also encountered other people. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian's frequent traps, they would have encountered even more people. However, there were very few pursuers that appeared at night. Zheng Luo got up and paced back and forth. "Let's find a place to settle the tribesmen first. Don't be too busy when the time comes." The dark environment at night was very restrictive for the Yanjiao people. Plus, if a fight broke out, others might get hurt. Why don't we speed up? We'll definitely reach that mountain before nightfall. I remember there's a place to hide there, Xiao Xian suggested. There weren't many mountains around and they were very short. There was no place to hide. Okay, that's it. The team got up and set off again. Along the way, Xiao Xian discussed countermeasures with Zheng Luo and the others. In the evening, the team reached the mountain. It was like a dividing line. On one side of the mountain, there were many moist rivers. On the other side, it was much drier. There were no caves on the mountain, but there were a few narrow crevices for the elderly, children, and women who hadn't awakened their totemic powers. These people who didn't have much fighting power could hide in there to prevent sneak attacks. The sun gradually disappeared and the sky darkened. Zheng Luo and the others stood on the mountain and looked down at the forest below. They should be here soon. Have you distributed the things? Everyone knows what to do, right? Xiao Xian asked the people standing behind him. Yes. The soldiers replied. Even if they didn't understand why Xiao Xian was doing this, they just had to do as he said. Zheng Luo stretched his shoulders and waved his arms to warm up. His eyes were cold as he looked at the forest at the foot of the mountain. All these years, the Flaming Horns rarely bullied others. Even when they fought, they followed the rules of the jungle. If they weren't forced into a corner, they wouldn't cause trouble. However, there were always people who liked to test their patience. Now they were being hunted by all sides. Weren't they just taking advantage of the situation to steal? Bah! Do they think we're easy to bully? We'll kill whoever comes. Those who fell into Zheng Luo's hands would have their necks broken without hesitation. Xiao Xian looked at the darkening sky. Let's go. Xiao Xian led the way down the mountain into the forest. Zheng Luo and the others followed closely behind. The forest at night was pitch black. There was almost no wind in the forest. It was so quiet that only the sounds of insects and strange birds could be heard. But soon, spots of light lit up in the forest. Some insects were attracted by the light and flew over. Xiao Xian leaned against a tree and tossed a glowing crystal into the air. Suddenly, Xiao Xian's action of throwing the crystal stopped, and he looked at the forest not far away. Since you're here, don't hide. He threw the glowing crystal in his hand, drawing a bright line in the air. Whoosh! There was the sound of a rope being swung. A dense barrage of sharpened wooden spikes shot out into the forest ahead. Although they had just arrived and Xiao Xian could only make simple things, this was enough. Whoosh! 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 Following the sound of wooden spikes hitting hard objects, black figures rushed out of the forest and headed straight for Xiao Xian. These people were wrapped in black cloth, only revealing their eyes. If one looked closely at their eyes during the day, they would notice that their eyes were different from others. Their eyes looked like those of nocturnal animals. Their pupils dilated as they rushed out. Even in a completely dark environment, they were not afraid because they could see. The totemic power in Xiao Xian's body was operating at its peak. His muscles, bones, and even his blood were filled with totemic power. His body's strength was greatly stimulated, like a sleeping beast that had awakened, revealing its fangs and claws. Xiao Xian's speed was too fast, and without the help of the glowing crystal, he was able to accurately meet the person in the lead. His sword was filled with murderous intent and an overbearing aura pressed down. Clang! The person who met Xiao Xian first had a bad premonition. His hair, which was wrapped in black cloth, stood on end. The sword in his hand hummed under the strong impact, as if it had been hit by a boulder. He wanted to throw the boulder away, but he found that the more strength he exerted, the greater the force on his arm. If it was only a boulder at the beginning, then in an instant, the boulder had become a mountain. It was unshakable. They knew that the Yanjiao people were strong, but they did not expect it to be to this extent. In one exchange, the person in black at the front was sent flying. His arm was numb from the impact and he did not even have time to use his skills. A sword with a cold metallic aura struck down like a bolt of lightning in the night. Poof! The person who had just regained his footing had a deep cut from his neck to his waist. Blood spurted out and could be heard clearly in the quiet forest. At the same time that Xiao Xian rushed out, Zheng Luo and the others made their move. After one of their companions fell, these men in black were only slightly frightened. However, they still had confidence. They were the kings of the night, and the night was their favorite hunting environment. This was because their eyes were most suitable for darkness. Even if there was no light at all, they could still see each other's figures clearly within a certain range. So what if they were strong? How could a mere Yanjiao compete with them in terms of night movement? They were overestimating themselves. Who knew that just as they were about to collide with the Yanjiao, they heard a loud bang. A thick smoke with a pungent smell spread out. Not to mention how the smell irritated their noses, the smoke that spread out blocked their line of sight. At night, Yanjiao people's vision was limited and their movements were severely restricted. They could only rely on their hearing and perception. In the past, when they couldn't see anything at night, the Flaming Horn tribesmen would rely on their hearing and sensitive senses. They wouldn't rely too much on their eyesight. Now that they couldn't see anything, they relied on their hearing and senses. Therefore, in terms of hearing and perception, they were still relatively strong. These people who planned a sneak attack at night did indeed have strong night vision. However, with a Taiha smoke bomb, they were all the same now. They could not see anything. Let's rely on our own abilities. These smoke bombs were given to them by the Taiha tribe before they left. They were placed in the same bag as the other herbs. The shaman had found them while rummaging through the herbs. These smoke bombs were a secret product of the Taiha tribe. It was said that the Taiha ancestors learned from wild beasts in the forest and finally perfected it. If they encountered a beast they could not defeat during a hunt, they would throw out these smoke bombs to escape. Although they could only confuse the beast for a moment, in a critical moment, 1 second of distraction could mean the difference between life and death. The Yanjiao people had asked the Taiha tribe for them many times, but they refused. They even asked for an exorbitant price. In the end, the Yanjiao people got angry and refused to buy. They would hunt with their own abilities. He didn't expect the Taiha tribe to give him 200 of these smoke bombs when he left this time. How generous of them. After all, these things were hard to make. Not everyone in the Taiha tribe had one, even for the Taiha tribe. They had not used these things before, but after Xiao Xian's divination predicted a possible sneak attack at night, he prepared them. Since the enemy chose to attack at night, it was very likely that they relied on their unique night vision. Xiao Xian had heard from the black bears in the royal city that there was a group of people who specialized in sneak attacks at night. They were called the Night Clan. After facing these people directly, Xiao Xian confirmed their identities. Taking a step back, even if they weren't from the Night Clan, and even if the smoke couldn't block the other party's line of sight, it would definitely have a disruptive effect. The smell would even stick to their bodies. As long as they didn't wash it, it would stay for a long time. Everyone could rely on their sense of smell to determine the other party's location. Chapter 485. If the Taiha tribesmen knew they were using something like this at night, they would be heartbroken. Ordinary people wouldn't think of using this at night, and the attackers obviously didn't expect to encounter such a situation. Therefore, just as they were feeling proud of their superior night vision, they were stunned by this sudden attack. The explosion of smoke enveloped the area. Before they could react, the Yanjiao people were already charging at them. The people who came with Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo were all people who cooperated well with each other. They could tell if it was their own people by the sound of their arms swinging. Xiao Xian heard a familiar cracking sound and raised an eyebrow. It was the sound of Zheng Luo crushing someone's arm. Xiao Xian had seen similar things happen before. Although the Yanjiao tribesmen and the night tribesmen in black couldn't see through the smoke, it was different for Xiao Xian. He was able to see everyone present through the smoke. Clang! Crack! The back of Duo Kang's axe smashed into a man in black. A piece of metal armor on his chest caved in, followed by the crisp sound of bones breaking. It wasn't the blade of the axe that broke it, it was the back of the axe that broke it. This was the first time the night tribesmen faced the warriors of the Flaming Horn tribe, and it was also an unforgettable experience. Only when they fought could they experience the ferocious beast's strength and ferocious attacks. The night tribesmen felt like they weren't facing humans, but ferocious beasts that suddenly jumped out of the forest. "Retreat!" one of them shouted. In terms of strength, they were no match for these Yanjiao tribesmen. Moreover, under such brute force, many of their techniques would be delayed for a moment because they needed time to recover from the numbness in their muscles. What's more, the smoke also obstructed their vision. Their advantage was their night vision, not fighting blindly with these barbarians here. Even worse, under the same blind situation, these Yanjiao barbarians reacted faster than them. He could only retreat for now. They retreated, but not directly. Instead, they retreated from the area covered in smoke. The smoke that they threw out couldn't possibly cover the entire forest. It only covered a small area. They'd be stupid to stay here and continue fighting with the Yanjiao. As soon as the men in black came out of the smoke-shrouded area, a rain of arrows shot towards them. Those who were fast enough dodged the arrows and ran away. Those who were a little slower were shot and injured. Xiao Xian rushed over and finished them off. None of these arrows entered the smoke-shrouded area because there were many Yanjiao players inside. They followed Xiao Xian's plan and did not leave to pursue the men in black for the time being. Instead, they waited until the last volley of arrows had been fired and received Xiao Xian's signal to leave. Not every Yanjiao player who rushed out was hiding in the smoke-shrouded area. Apart from a few Yanjiao players who were still hiding in the forest, Xiao Xian was the only one who was exposed. Most of the men in black who had been injured by the arrows had been Xiao Xian's last hits. Not far from the bushes, there were two men staring at Xiao Xian. They drew their bows and narrowed their eyes, locking onto Xiao Xian. Only they had the eyesight to aim at a target in the dark of night. Bzzzt. There was the faint sound of a bowstring vibrating. The metal arrowhead spun and flew at high speed towards Xiao Xian's direction. It was aimed at Xiao Xian's heart. Xiao Xian's eyes twitched. With a flick of his wrist, his sword swayed and blocked in front of him. Clang! The arrowhead struck the sword with a crisp sound that made people's hearts tremble. With the arrow blocked, Xiao Xian looked towards the bushes. There really were archers. Xiao Xian activated the totemic power in his body. The totemic patterns on his body were blocked by the grass and mud. He carefully sensed every change in the air around him. His ears caught every slight sound, felt the movement of the grass in the wind, and even the heartbeat of the enemy who was holding their breath. Xiao Xian could sense the presence of anyone within a radius of 10 meters. There was another person nearby. He could smell a suspicious scent and hear the other person's breathing. Even though the other person was trying his best to hide his presence, Xiao Xian could still sense his specific location. Without relying on his night vision, Xiao Xian could even sense the other person's grip on the hilt of his sword. This was the sensory ability he had developed after hunting for a long time, even at night. When Xiao Xian looked towards the bushes, the two archers hiding behind the bushes suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if the other person could see through the cover of the night and the leaves to see where they were. Every movement they made, even every detail of their fingers on the bowstring, could be seen by the other person. Under this strange feeling, the two archers looked at each other. What should we do? Move to another place? One of the archers signaled silently with his eyes. The other archer looked towards Xiao Xian. Coincidentally, Xiao Xian was walking towards them. The strange feeling in his heart grew even stronger. Under this strange feeling, the person drew an arrow and shot it. His movements were smooth and fluid. From drawing the arrow to shooting, it only took an instant. Before the enemy shot the arrow, Xiao Xian had already moved. He quickly ran towards the direction of the arrow. His body was like a swift leopard as he rushed straight over. Then, he suddenly bent his knees and bounced up. His feet left the ground, and when his body leaped up, the sword in the air collided with the arrow that was shot towards him. Clang! The arrow was shaken off. Xiao Xian hooked onto a branch and nimbly flipped over. Before landing, his other hand caught the arrow that was shaken off, hit the branch and bounced back, and threw it out. Pfft! There was a muffled groan. One of the two archers hiding behind the bushes was pierced by the arrow. Blood flowed out from where the arrow had pierced through. The injured man wanted to stand up and run away, but as soon as he moved, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He looked down at his chest and saw that there was an animal bone armor protecting his heart. The arrow did not penetrate this animal bone armor. To be precise, the arrow did not touch this animal bone armor. Instead, it grazed the edge of the armor. If it had been slightly off course, it would have hit the armor. Coincidence? Or, the injured archer's eyes were filled with confusion and surprise. Despair rose in his heart. At the same time, a thought appeared in his mind. He was so shocked that large drops of sweat appeared on his forehead. His body could not support itself. He fell to the ground and groaned in pain. The arrows they shot were smeared with poison. As long as one was injured by the arrowhead, the poison would quickly spread through the body. But when they smeared the poison on their arrows, they did not expect that the arrows they shot would be used on their own people. The archer in black looked in Xiao Xian's direction again. He saw Xiao Xian's figure getting closer and closer. His whole body trembled violently. It was not clear whether it was because of the pain or because of the shock of his guess. Before he lost consciousness, he roared. "He can see us!" The other archer wanted to run, but Xiao Xian's sword had already come down. The people hiding in other places were shocked. They had all heard the roars of their own people. "He can see us. How is that possible? Aren't they Yanjiao people?" They had never heard of Yanjiao people being able to see at night. If that was really the case, then it was beyond their expectations. How is that possible? How is that possible? The archer hiding behind a tree not far from Xiao Xian felt his heart beat wildly. If the other party could see at night, then what advantage would they have? Just as he was about to run, he suddenly heard a rustling sound behind him. It sounded like the wind blowing through tree branches. His heart trembled. He turned around and slashed. Clang! Xiao Xian held the sword in his hand. The air around the blade was mixed with the smell of blood. It pressed down from above like the claws of a giant beast, mercilessly stomping down. The archer who took the blow felt pain worse than if he had been chopped by a knife or an axe. His bones felt like they were about to fall apart, and his legs almost gave way. His face, which had been full of murderous intent, was now contorted by the pain that spread from his wrist to his arm. But it was night, and his face was covered with a black cloth, so no one could see his expression. The sound of the blades clashing against each other was enough to make people feel as if they were in ice. Their eardrums trembled, their hair stood on end, and their muscles trembled. The sword edge drew a sickle-like arc-pucci. Blood spurted out. Xiao Xian didn't look at the fallen archer. He bent his little finger and blew into it. This was a signal to the people in the smoke, as well as the Yanjiao warriors hiding in other places, that they could start hunting. Even at night, even though this was a place they had never been to before, they could still clearly distinguish the scents of the various creatures in the forest, as well as the people hiding in the bushes, behind the tree trunks, and on the branches. Xiao Xian continued to look for the archers in hiding, to prevent them from shooting in the dark. The night was still long. When the first rays of Yang Guang shone on the forest in the early morning, the team on the mountain was ready to set off. In addition to those in the forest, the mountain had also been attacked, but there were relatively few sneak attacks on the mountain. The sacrificed warriors had been cremated, and the fire used was the fire of the kindling that the shaman had summoned by building a temporary fire pit. As long as the people were there, the kindling would be there. The shaman had once said that the souls of the dead would return to the kindling. The people of the tribe often said that their ancestors and other deceased people were with them. The souls were there, and there was no sorrow. As long as there were people alive, the kindling would continue to be passed on. After crossing the mountain, they arrived at the dry grassland. Xiao Xian also met the people on horseback that he had seen before, but Xiao Xian didn't say much to them. Those people looked at the Yanjiao tribe with guarded eyes. After all, anyone who saw a migrating team would be on guard. Seeing that the Yanjiao team had no intention of staying, those people let out a long sigh of relief. Who were those people that just passed by? I don't know, they didn't look easy to get along with. Who cares, as long as they don't settle in our territory, it's fine. Don't try to steal our territory. But such a large tribe, and they don't look weak, why would they migrate? This was a remote area, and news was delayed for a long time. They weren't well informed at all, so they didn't know about the Yanjiao team. So when they saw the Yanjiao team, they were just curious about where they were going. After all, there was fertile land and plenty of prey, which was the opposite direction of where the team was going. Chapter 486. From the grasslands to the dry and barren land where the 1,000-grain gold was found, Xiao Xian used the knowledge Ji Ju taught him to identify herbs and told the tribesmen to prepare some. Along the way, there were too many things. They were hunted down, and there were all kinds of dangers in the forest. The injured had used up a lot of medicine. The medicine given by the Taiha tribe was almost gone. Although they had picked some herbs along the way, they couldn't withstand the huge consumption. Now, they didn't have much medicine left. Those who had not awakened their totemic power, as well as the elderly, would inevitably fall ill after a long period of time. It had been 20 days since they set off from the tribe. There was still a long way to go and they had to keep going. Naturally, they had to prepare more herbs. Xiao Xian taught the tribesmen how to identify the herbs in this area. If they encountered any, they had to pick them and prepare. Looking up at the sky, Xiao Xian noticed a bird flying high in the sky. He could not see what it looked like. It flew too high and nimbly. Even arrows would not be able to shoot it down. "What's wrong?" asked Jing Luo as he walked over. That bird appeared again. Xiao Xian pointed at the shadow in the sky. Again. Jing Luo was alert. It must be someone's pet or it's tracking our movements. "Chief, why do you think the people from Royal City haven't appeared yet?" asked Xiao Xian. "You mean, that bird belongs to Royal City?" Jing Luo fell silent. He wasn't someone who didn't know anything. He knew that once the people in King's City decided to deal with someone, they would definitely take action. The people they had met before were just tentacles that the people in King's City had released first. Since other people could track the movements of the Flaming Horn tribe, the people of King's City must know something. They didn't show up, maybe they were waiting for the best time. "They're here too?" asked Jing Luo. Although it was a question, Jing Luo was already 50% sure. The Royal City's people aren't used to the forest, so they haven't made a move yet. They're probably waiting for us to leave the forest and go to an open area before making a move. Xiao Xian thought about the terrain of the place they had passed through when they first came here. After leaving this barren mountain, we will pass through a more open area with more people. The road is also relatively flat. Only after passing through that area will we enter the semi-desert area. The people from the Royal City are most likely to appear on the road in the middle. Jing Luo's heart sank. Although they didn't like the pretentious people in King's City, they had to admit that the 6 aristocratic families, who used to be the strongest tribes, were definitely not to be underestimated, to be able to take down their current territory and develop to such a scale. There were children, old people, and women who hadn't awakened yet. They couldn't let go of the battle at all, nor could they give up on these people. As for the solution, the only way was to leave some people behind to block the royal city's pursuit team and let the rest of the tribe continue their journey. Against the people from the royal city, it was very likely that they would never be able to keep up with the team. They couldn't even be cremated. However, for the tribe, sacrifices were inevitable. Even Zheng Luo was prepared to stay behind. We have to arrange for some people to stay behind the team. Zheng Luo looked at the barren mountains around them and said, I'll discuss this with Duo Kong. While the team was hurrying, Zheng Luo talked to the warriors according to the situation of each family. Some families were supported by one person, so they definitely couldn't let him stay behind the team. Zheng Luo calculated that to temporarily block the royal city's team, at least 1,000 people would be needed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be of much use. Zheng Luo wanted to add himself, but he was the chief and had to lead the team. Even if he wanted to, the others wouldn't allow it. How could a team without a leader move forward? Should they appoint a new chief now? I'll just join. Brother, you lead the team and keep moving, said Zheng Cheng as he strode over. Although Zheng Cheng was rash, he wasn't much weaker than Zheng Luo. Otherwise, he wouldn't have competed with Zheng Luo for the position of chief. Usually, the two brothers didn't see eye to eye. Now, Zheng Cheng stood up. Zheng Luo looked at his younger brother and suddenly felt his eyes sting. He opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted by Zheng Cheng. Don't talk nonsense. That's it. How many people are there? Let me see. Zheng Cheng snatched the name sheet from Zheng Luo's hand. Oh, Duo Kong and Guang Yi are here too. Wuxia is here too. Not bad, not bad. There's also Zhui, he's got guts. And Xiao Xian. That's not right. Brother, why is Xiao Xian's name on this? How can you put Xiao Xian's name on this? You're getting more and more muddle-headed as a chief. Zheng Cheng took the opportunity to scold his brother. Zheng Luo was stunned too. He snatched the sheet back. He had told everyone about it during the break. Then, he placed the sheet on a rock for those who met the requirements and were willing to stay to write their names on it. There were too many people there so he didn't notice. When did Xiao Xian write his name? Anyone in the team could stay, even Zheng Luo. Only two people couldn't stay. One was the shamaness. Many things couldn't be done without the shamaness. This time, the shamaness had to be with them. The other person was Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was the tribe's elder and wore the ancestral bone ornaments. If they wanted to bring the tribe back to the old land, other than the shamaness, they couldn't do it without Xiao Xian. Plus, Xiao Xian was from there. Without Xiao Xian, even if they could go back, it would be difficult. They didn't know anything about the other side. Cross it off, cross it off. Hurry up and cross off Xiao Xian's name. Zheng Cheng dug out a ball of dark green mud from somewhere and pasted it on Xiao Xian's name. In the next few days, the team continued on their journey. Zheng Luo continued to check the name list to see if they met his requirements. When they were about to leave the barren mountains, Zheng Luo gave the final name list. These 1,000 people would be at the back of the team. If they encountered people from Royal City, they would have to hold them off. They would be the tribe's last shield against the Royal City's spears. There was a mournful atmosphere in the team. However, they had already explained everything in the past few days. These people knew what they had to do and the possible consequences. Zheng Luo finished reporting the name list and gave a simple explanation. He put away the cloth and wiped his red eyes. Although he had seen many casualties along the way, this time, it was not the small forces from before. It was a tough battle. As the leader, Zheng Luo felt sad too. However, in order to go back, the necessary sacrifices had to be made. If there was a need later, he would step up himself. He rubbed his eyes and opened them to see Xiao Xian standing in front of him. Knowing why, Zheng Luo coughed. Xiao Xian, you know that everyone else in our tribe can stay, including me. We can all stay behind. Only you and the shamaness can't. If not, who's going to lead the tribe back to the old land? Xiao Xian paused. I just want to try. Try what? Zheng Luo was confused. If we meet people from Royal City, I want to try to stop them. If I can't, I can at least cause them some trouble. You. What trouble do you want to cause them? No, you want to borrow the power of our ancestors. Zheng Luo glared at Xiao Xian. Yes. Xiao Xian nodded. No, you want to borrow the power of our ancestors to bring the tribe back. You can't risk it here. It wasn't easy for us to get here. You can't gamble with this. Zheng Luo refused firmly. If our ancestors were here, they wouldn't want everyone to die here just to go back. Chief, you know that I can survive a king beast. If people from Royal City come, I can survive too. Plus, I can make it easier for the warriors and buy more time for the team. No. The ancestors agreed. You, ask the bone ornament if you don't believe me. Xiao Xian took it off and handed it to Zheng Luo. Zheng Luo's facial muscles twitched. How the hell did he have the ability to communicate with his ancestors? It was always the shamaness who communicated with them. Seeing that Xiao Xian was still staring at him, Zheng Luo looked at the bone ornament in front of him, then turned his head and waved his hand. Go find the shamaness. We'll do whatever she says. Xiao Xian grinned. The shamaness wouldn't object. Indeed, the shamaness didn't object. When she heard Xiao Xian say he wanted to stay behind, she stared at Xiao Xian expressionlessly for almost 10 minutes. Xiao Xian's forehead was sweating. Finally, she said lightly, go. If it wasn't for the bulging veins on the back of her hand from gripping her walking stick too hard, people would have thought she was as calm as she looked. No one could be calm at a time like this. They were confused and uncertain about their future, worried and anxious about what was to come. However, they had already come this far. There was no turning back. Walking out of this barren mountain, the view became wider and more human. Because people often walked on the grass, several clear paths were formed. There were also some clear ruts on the ground. The people around them were all trading teams from different tribes. However, compared to He Xiong's caravans, they were much smaller. They were just trading teams from smaller tribes. The largest group had less than 100 people, while the smallest group only had 20 or 30 people. When they saw the Yinjiao team, they all looked over curiously. They had never seen the Yinjiao people before. They were just curious about where this team had come from. They looked like they had traveled a long way. Their clothes were dirty and their faces were tired, but it couldn't hide their aura. They were not to be trifled with. That was the first impression they had. Thus, these people lowered their heads and hurried away. They were worried that the Yinjiao people would steal their goods. Xiao Xian looked up at the sky. The bird was no longer there, but that didn't mean they had given up on watching. In fact, they didn't think there was a need to do so. They were almost here. Chapter 487. As if feeling the tension and danger in the air, the small caravans quickened their pace again. Although everything was calm now, there was an inexplicable sense of trepidation that made them unable to calm down. Something was about to happen. The cows and horses that were pulling the carts were still anxiously stomping their hooves. They even wanted to deviate from their original route and run to the side, but they were forcefully pulled back. A cart-pulling beast that looked like a deer that had lost its antlers was snorting from its nose. It seemed to have a bad temper. It kept raising its head as if it was about to stand up. The people around had to go and suppress it. What's going on? I don't know, it seems to be going crazy. Not just us, look at the side. As far as the eyes could see, all the beasts that were pulling the carts, including the docile ones and the irritable ones, all had similar changes. It was as if they were trying to escape, even more so than before. The horses neighed and the beasts roared. It was chaos. What's going on? Someone couldn't help but shout. Wait, listen. Rumble, there seemed to be a rumbling sound coming from afar. The ground was shaking. Although it was not obvious now, there was indeed movement. The cautious people pulled the carts and horses, standing in place and looking around cautiously. Some even turned back to look at the tribe that they had seen not long ago. Was it them? No, it wasn't. The sound came from another direction. Not long after, the sound became more and more obvious. Even those who had not awakened their totemic power could hear it clearly. In the distance, there was a cloud of dust at the intersection of heaven and earth. Because most of the surroundings were grasslands, there was not much dust, but it was still very obvious. A huge team of thousands appeared. The metal armors and weapons, under Yang Guang's gaze, reflected a dazzling light. It was as if the entire team was shrouded in light. As the team moved forward, layer by layer, like the ripples on the surface of a lake. Looking from afar, a rough estimate showed that this team should be no less than 4,000 people. It did not sound like a lot, but in this relatively small place where most tribes only had 1,000 or 2,000 people, such a well-equipped team that seemed to be strong could easily wipe out any tribe here. Gulp, the people who saw this swallowed their saliva. At this moment, they did not even know what to say. After living in such a remote place for so long, they had never seen such a scene before. A member of the nobility? Only the nobles had such luxurious equipment. But why did so many people come to this place? Regardless of why these people were here, seeing that the group was getting closer and closer, they hurriedly called for the people of the trading team to hide. This group was even more terrifying than the migrating group they had just seen. After all, there were many elderly, children, and women in the migration team they had seen earlier. However, this team was almost entirely made up of warriors who had come to fight. Dodge! Get out of the way! Those who were driving the carriages and those who were moving the goods hurriedly moved to the side, hoping that they would not block the path of these people. Rumble, it was as if thunder was approaching. The giant beast, which was much thicker than 4 people stacked on top of each other, vigorously swung its 4 limbs and ran on the grass. To it, this was just a small jog. The tremors caused by his large feet stomping on the ground caused even the grass on the ground to be shaken up. Inside the cabin of the biggest car, Yizong frowned and looked doubtfully at the square plate in front of him. He reached out and grabbed a handful of fine golden sand from a clay bowl beside him and sprinkled it on the square plate. The fine golden sand spontaneously separated into stripes on the square plate. The stripes were exactly where the lines were drawn on the square plate. The fine golden sand was still moving. Some moved closer to the jade stone, while others moved away. However, it did not take long for the changes to stop. Then, with a soft pop, the golden sand in the square plate spontaneously dispersed. What's wrong, Yizong? Did the divination come out? Several people next to him came over and asked. Yanjiao is just ahead. It's just that I can't divine anything more. Yizong's indifferent face showed a rare conflicted expression. He wanted to divine more, but it was as if there was a layer of fog. Every time he divined, it was a mess. The jade stone in the square plate could not form a result. It was very chaotic, especially when it came to the young Yanjiao elder. He really could not divine anything at all. At first, it was understandable that he couldn't divine anything. But now, the more he understood, the more he could divine. He should have been able to divine something useful, but other than the general movements of the Flaming Horn tribe, he couldn't divine anything else. Yizong had heard from Yi Bing that Yi Bing had divined something about the Yanjiao in the tower beside the royal city's gate, but he could not divine anything. Now, the same thing was happening to Yizong. It was unbelievable. No wonder the Yi family had always been on guard against the Yinjiao tribe. The Yinjiao tribe really made them feel uneasy. If this uneasy factor was not removed, it was believed that many people in the Yi family would not be able to live peacefully. Yi Bing, after returning from the tower, seemed to have hit a bottleneck and could not make any further progress. The elders also said in private that if Yi Bing could not break through this bottleneck, he would be stuck here. For the Yi family, they would give up on cultivating him. Thinking about Yi Bing's situation, Yi Zong picked up a jade stone in the square plate and slowly rubbed it, thinking. The girl in leather armor next to him was about to ask something, but suddenly her expression changed. She opened the animal skin bag hanging on her waist and reached out to take out a creature that looked like a bee. It was the size of a thumb and had an oval body. At this moment, this small flying insect was lying in the girl's hand, facing one direction and flapping its wings. Although it had wings, they were too small compared to its fat body. It could not fly at all. The movement of its wings was just a reflection of its mood at this moment. It was excited. There are fire crystals. The girl in leather armor said. This fat flying insect would only behave like this when it smelled the fire crystals. Looking at the direction it was facing, it was the direction they were heading. It must be the Yinjiao people. The Yinjiao people had salt and fire crystals. They must have brought them with them when they were migrating. The others in the carriage were also in high spirits. I wonder how many fire crystals the Yinjiao people have. Compared to the excitement of the others, Yi Zong was still silent. He was not interested in the fire crystals. What he really cared about was whether the Yinjiao tribe had a better divination ability than the Yi family, and the reason why his divination had always failed. For the Yi family, the fire crystals were not very helpful. Fire crystals were the favorite of fighting tribes. Even if they had fire crystals, most of them were given to people who worked for them. Warriors were human beings, and wise men were the best. The Yi family had always thought so. They were willing to be wise men and leave the physical work to others. The insect in the girl's hand was flapping its wings faster and faster. We're close. The Yinjiao people are nearby. The girl in leather armor lifted the curtain and looked out, ignoring the dust outside. Yinjiao people. They're Yinjiao people. The rest of the people in the carriage also lifted the curtains and looked forward. In front of them, about 800 paces away, stood a row of people. When the small caravans passing by were trying to avoid them, this row of people stood out. Although they could not see their faces clearly, the people in the carriage could guess who they were. They must be Yinjiao people. Why are there so few of them? They must have known we were coming, so they were prepared. It doesn't look like they were in a hurry. Yi Zong looked up. He could not be sure if the Yinjiao people were guessing or divining. No matter what, this hidden threat had to be removed. He did not want to end up like Yi Bing. As long as Yinjiao was wiped off the face of this world, the so-called obstacles and interference would cease to exist. The carriage pulled by the giant beast slowed down, allowing the other warriors to rush forward. As for the fear that the Yinjiao people were setting up traps, there was no need. Based on their calculations, the Yinjiao people did not have the time to set up such traps. In the carriage behind them, the fox and a few other leaders of tribes who had sided with the royal city during the winter came out. Those who sided with the royal city had to show their sincerity and value. They had sent many people to Yinjiao this time. Of the 5,000 people, 2,000 were from these tribes. The fox leader looked at the row of people in front of him, his eyes filled with hatred. They had lost the fire crystals and the salt mines. Even their remaining treasures had been handed over to the Yi family and the nobles of the royal city when they sided with the royal city. As the leader of a tribe, he had to put on a smiling face in front of those brats from the royal city. What a disgrace! These losses, he would get back from the people of the Flaming Horns tribe. The salt, fire crystals, and other things that he had lost, he would get them back with his own hands. The people in front received the order and sped up. The rumbling of hooves carried murderous intent as they galloped forward. Behind the first wave of cavalry, more warriors followed. Seeing the people in front charge past, the fox leader, who was watching from the carriage, smirked. From today onwards, the Yanjiao tribe would disappear from the face of this world. None of the people the royal city wanted to deal with were still alive. Some of the small caravans watched from afar. Even from afar, they could imagine the ferocious aura that the people standing on that path had to endure. The Yanjiao people who were directly facing this group felt it even more strongly. The ground was about to shake. Avoiding it could save them from danger temporarily. But could they avoid it now? Avoiding it meant that they would be hunted down endlessly. They could not avoid it. Even if all of them died in battle, they could not avoid it. Zheng Qing raised his eyebrows. This was his first time taking on such an important task. Holding the heavy sword in his hand, Zheng Qing's eyes flashed coldly. Feeling the ground shake more and more violently, Zheng Qing took a deep breath and raised the arm holding the sword. He was about to say something when Xiao Xian said, "All of you, back off. I'll go first." Zheng Qing, who had been about to shout out his courage, Zheng Qing stopped himself and looked at Xiao Xian as if he did not understand. He wanted to ask something but Duo Kong dragged him back. Chapter 488. What was going on? Looking at the row of people retreating, whether it was the people watching from the beast carriages or the small caravans watching from afar, they were all puzzled. Could it be that there was actually an ambush? Or had they changed their minds and decided to retreat? Not everyone retreated. There was still one person standing there. Whether it was the people from the small caravan, the cavalry that was charging forward, or the people who were watching the battle from the beast-drawn carriages, none of them could believe their eyes. What were the Yanjiao people planning? Why did they all retreat, leaving only one person standing there? Xiao Xian from Yanjiao. Someone who recognized Xiao Xian shouted. He's Xiao Xian. The Yanjiao boy who sent Lu Zong flying with one slap. The girl in leather armor looked at the figure in front of her. I heard that the boy is very close to Jin Gu from the Ji family. Aren't you afraid that Jin Gu will be angry if you kill him? A young man twirling his sword asked the girl next to him. The girl didn't care. Jin Gu doesn't interfere with politics. He only knows how to farm. He doesn't even know that the royal city is sending troops. By the time he finds out, the boy is already dead. Is Xiao Xian from Yanjiao really that powerful? Another person asked. The young man with the sword looked forward. With a twist of his wrist, the blade drew an arc and sliced a piece of grass that had been kicked away by the beast's hooves in half. I'd like to see how powerful that brat is. Some of the royal city troops had seen what happened at the city gates. They admitted that Xiao Xian from Yanjiao was indeed powerful. But that was then. The situation now was completely different. This boy dared to fight alone. He had a death wish. Xiao Xian sheathed his sword in the scabbard on his back and took out the bone ornament necklace around his neck. Ancestor, it's up to you now. From the day the tribe started migrating, Xiao Xian could feel the sound coming from the bone ornaments. No one else could hear it, but it sounded like a flame being blown by the wind. Xiao Xian sensed anger from the 4 bone ornaments. Did bone ornaments have emotions? Even if he didn't, it was possible that he did. After all, he was the incarnation of the ancestor and represented the will of the ancestor. He took the risk to stand here because he felt the bone ornament's anger. That was why he made this decision. The tall warhorse stomped its hooves, getting closer and closer. The knight on the horse was holding a spear that glowed with a bloodthirsty cold light. Xiao Xian could even smell the flying dust. In the face of the suffocating killing intent and the seemingly unstoppable offensive, Xiao Xian, who stood there alone, was as insignificant as a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Xiao Xian's eyes were wide open in the face of this fierce attack. He stared straight ahead, secretly calculating in his heart. It was getting closer. It was getting closer. The charging knights aimed their spears at Xiao Xian. The bone ornaments made even louder sounds. Whoosh, whoosh, it sounded like a prairie fire being blown by the wind. Only Xiao Xian could hear it. Now was the time. Xiao Xian's totemic power and power of inheritance were activated to the maximum in an instant. The muscles all over his body twitched rapidly. If one listened carefully, they could even hear the thumping sounds, like the beating of war drums. Yi Zong, who was in the carriage, sensed something. His eyelids twitched and he stood up in shock. Because he was in such a hurry, he knocked over the tray in front of him and didn't even look at it. The charging knights raised their spears and were about to plunge them down in the next moment. But soon, their cold pupils constricted. Above their pupils, flames were reflected. The flames were like dragons flying out, dancing and twisting together, shooting straight into the sky. An unprecedented aura erupted from Xiao Xian's body. A scorching aura swept across, and the air seemed to be burning. The charging troops seemed to have met an invisible hand, blocking their advance. Some of them almost fell off their horses. What kind of aura was this? It made people tremble in fear, and their scalps tingled. Whoosh, in the instant, the flames expanded. A giant covered in flames seemed to walk out of thin air, looking down at everything on the ground. The world in front of him seemed to be dyed in flames, covered with a layer of fire. Xiao Xian looked ahead and lifted his foot. The giant flaming man also lifted his foot from the flames. Then, following Xiao Xian's foot, he stomped down. Boom! The powerful force, in the midst of the unprecedented aura, left a huge crater in the ground, and made a shocking sound like thunder. The soil on the ground was peeled off and crushed, like a huge firework. The hard rocks under the soil were also stepped on, and the sound of cracking was deafening. A crack that seemed to tear the entire ground plate rushed from the crater to the front. It was like a fast-growing branch, constantly branching out, and branching out again and again. The hard rocks on the ground were blown up by the force of the vibration, tumbling in the air, and gravel flew everywhere. The charging troops, along with their horses, were blown away by the exploding rocks. They were unable to escape. Men and horses were thrown off their feet, and even their screams were drowned out by the roar of the earth. The whole world seemed to have been turned upside down. The earth trembled. The grass that had taken root due to the drought seemed to have been pulled out at the moment of the tremors. It swayed in the air, shattered into pieces, and dissipated with the airwaves. The rocks that were blown up from the cracked ground flew in the direction of the royal city troops. Faced with the high-speed flying rocks, the troops panicked. The giant beast that pulled the carriage roared, and its huge body shook. Its two front legs almost knelt under the tremors of the ground. Bang! A rock the size of a human head hit the side of the carriage, creating a dent. The carriage almost fell apart. If it weren't for the fact that the carriage was mostly made of metal, it wouldn't have been able to withstand the impact. The young man holding the sword trembled and almost dropped it. He stared at the flame giant with wide eyes. He had wanted to fight the kid himself, but now, a few pieces of cloth around the carriage were torn off. They danced in the air with the airwaves. That's fierce. The people in the carriage jumped out of the beast carriage. Under the protection of the guards, they quickly retreated and dodged the attacks. They could hear the sound of flying rocks and the sound of falling rocks. Just listening to these sounds was enough to make people fearful. In the back of the carriage, the fox leader, who was holding on to the side of the carriage to steady himself, also trembled. His eyes were so wide open that they seemed to be about to pop out. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was this the power? Was this the power that Yan Jiao used to escape from the king beast? No wonder they could escape safely from the salt flats. No wonder the king beast couldn't stop them. No wonder they couldn't even find a body. This was it. The fox leader's usually cunning face was contorted with hatred. He could not take this lying down. He wanted to take back what he had lost from Yan Jiao. But he didn't even have the courage to charge forward. Retreat! The leader roared. They couldn't attack. The only thing they could do was retreat. No one could advance in the face of such power. Only death awaited them. The horses that had luckily escaped the fate of being flung away neighed in panic. The riders couldn't calm them down in a short time. All they could do was grab onto the horses' necks to avoid being thrown off. They left the battlefield together with the horses. Instinctively, the horses galloped away from the danger. Some of them tripped over cracks in the ground, some were hit by flying stones, and some were knocked away by their panicked companions. The people from the small caravan who were watching from afar were all hiding behind their vehicles. They were far away, so there were no big rocks coming at them. However, there were flying pebbles and dust. The strong airwaves were so strong that they couldn't even open their eyes. One could only imagine what kind of impact those who were close to them were enduring. Everyone who had witnessed the scene was still in disbelief. It was as if they were hallucinating. Their hearts were still racing and their legs were shaking. They couldn't even stand up. Xiao Xian felt the totemic power running faster and faster in his body. He wondered if he should unleash another burst of power. He could still withstand another stomp, but seeing that the other side was retreating quickly, another stomp would not have much effect. It would be a waste of energy, so he stopped and waited for the other side's next reaction. If the other side wanted to charge again, he could stomp again. Behind Xiao Xian, the Yinjiao warriors who had retreated were prepared for this. Some had followed Zheng Luo to the salt mines before. Others had never seen anything like this before. Their jaws were still open and they ate a mouthful of dust. They were prepared to die. Why did it feel like the elder alone was enough to take on all of them? The commotion was even greater than if all of them had gone into battle. The ground was cracked, piece by piece. Some were even flipped upside down. Half of the worm's body was still moving. This, Zheng Cheng said this several times but couldn't say anything. Duo Kong and the others were the same. Although they had felt the power of a king beast at the salt flats, they were just like the horses that had been knocked over. They had fainted after being sent flying. It wasn't as shocking as seeing it with their own eyes. If they had been doubting whether Xiao Xian could take them back to the old haunt, now they were all confident. The royal city team finally managed to escape the fate of being smashed. After everything had stopped, they regrouped. The people who had been sitting in the largest carriage were now standing on the ground. They looked very disheveled. Their exquisite clothes were covered in dust and grass. Green grass juice and wet mud were splattered on their clothes. It was difficult to get rid of them. Whether it was the people who didn't take Yinjiao seriously or the people who were wary of Yinjiao, they were now filled with caution and deep fear. They had always thought that the rumors of the demonized Yinjiao were exaggerated. Now they knew that they had underestimated them. If they had been any closer to the charging cavalry, it wouldn't have been as easy as it was now. A gust of wind blew past, blowing away the dust on the ground. The ground was cracked and filled with large and small stones. It looked like it had been cut into pieces and sifted. People and horses were trapped in it, struggling. Some had already lost consciousness. On one end of the messy area, there was a person standing alone. On the other end, there was a huge team gathered there. The two sides looked at each other. At this moment, there was an eerie silence. Chapter 489. What should we do? Attack again? Why don't we wait for a while and see what happens? Standing on the cracked ground, the royal city team looked at the person standing on the other side. Although the flame giant had disappeared, Xiao Xian was still surrounded by flames. no one could be sure if the scene would repeat itself. The team looked at Xiao Xian in shock. What happened just now was too strange and shocking. It was just an instant change, but it turned everything around. The flame giant gave off an indescribable sense of danger. Even those who were far away could feel the extremely dangerous and oppressive aura. What was that? Asked the girl in leather armor standing beside Yizong. I don't know. Although Yizong tried his best to remain calm, his heart was in turmoil. In that moment, he felt an extremely strong impact. It wasn't a physical one. They were a little further away, so they weren't seriously injured. However, they almost had a mental breakdown. They couldn't even concentrate, let alone perform a divination. There was no movement here for the time being. When Xiao Xian realized that the enemy wasn't going to attack again, he turned around and headed towards where Jing Cheng and the others were. Yanjiao's migration team had already gone far into the semi-desert. They had to catch up with the team. Let's go first. Xiao Xian called the people who were standing there in a daze and ran in the direction of the tribe's migration. Hey, Xiao Xian, what was that? Was that the power of your ancestors? Can you do it again? Zheng Cheng looked at Xiao Xian expectantly. If this power could be used continuously, they wouldn't have to worry about the people from Royal City at all. Looking at their eager eyes, Xiao Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head. No. The power that exploded just now was more successful than Xiao Xian had imagined. However, because of this unprecedented power, Xiao Xian had to bear more pressure. Although he could still run and jump, the pain in his muscles was very clear. He could do it again, but only once. If he really did it a third time with the same power, he wouldn't even be able to run. Will the people from Royal City continue to chase us? Duo Kong asked. Yes, but they won't move immediately. Let's take advantage of this time to hurry. Otherwise, the situation will be even worse. I'm guessing that there are reinforcements from Royal City, Xiao Xian said. Reinforcements? It wasn't just Jing Cheng and Duo Kong. The others didn't understand either. Just for the Yanjiao tribe, why would the people from Royal City spend so much effort to kill them? They wouldn't believe that it was just for the salt and fire crystals. Because until now, the people from Royal City hadn't even mentioned the salt and fire crystals. They attacked as soon as they saw them, and it was so murderous that it seemed like they didn't want to give them any chance of survival. Anyway, let's hurry, Xiao Xian said. They, who were at the back, kept a distance from the rest of the tribe to prevent the people from Royal City from chasing after them. After entering the semi-desert, there were fewer people and fewer threats. They only needed to guard against the people from Royal City. The small tribes in the desert could be taken care of by the people in front of them. Seeing the people from Yanjiao leave, the people from Royal City didn't give the order to chase after them. Instead, they rested where they were. How long until the people from Chaoqiu City and Feng City arrive? Yizong asked the people next to him. Soon, at most 2 days. If they're fast, they'll be here before tomorrow night. A young man with the word Chao embroidered on his clothes said. The Yanjiao people are really strong. They're a big threat, especially that Xiao Xian. It's better to kill people like him. Indeed. If we let them go, I'm worried that they'll become the second thorn in our side, Yizong muttered as he looked in the direction the Yanjiao people had left. The young man from the Chao family had good hearing. His ears twitched, and he caught the key words in Yizong's words. Second thorn. Chaoqiu City was the furthest away from Royal City. He hadn't expected to be found this time, so he had followed the main group here. The others had followed behind, hoping to get a share of the loot. To him, salt and fire crystals were very attractive. He had always thought that the others had the same idea as him, but now it seemed that things weren't that simple. The Chao family of Chaoqiu had been one of the 6 major tribes back in the day. They didn't care much about other things. Other than those who stayed in Royal City, the rest of them stayed in Chaoqiu City, guarding their own land. From time to time, they would exploit the small tribes nearby to fill their warehouses. They had heard a little about the Yinjiao tribe. So there's still the first thorn. Who's the first thorn? The young man from the Chao family asked. The others, including the girl in leather armor from the Ji family, walked over. They had never heard of this before. Who was the first thorn? Yizong kept his mouth shut. There were some things he couldn't let others know. If he hadn't become a core member of the Yi family due to his talent and strength, he wouldn't have known these secrets. The girl in leather armor looked around, then pulled Yizong to the side. Hey, Ji Lu, where are you taking Yizong? Someone shouted from behind. Ji Lu, who was wearing leather armor, ignored the people behind her. She was a descendant of the royal Ji family. Her grandfather was the current king and her father was the eldest son of the king. He was likely to inherit the throne in the future. Hence, her status was relatively high and she had the right to know many things. Tell me, it's just the two of us. What do you mean by the first thorn and the second thorn? The girl in leather armor asked. Yizong thought for a moment. Do you know what happened in Royal City 1,000 years ago? 1,000 years ago? Ji Lu didn't expect Yizong to bring up something so long ago. However, because they were going against the Yinjiao, she had heard much about it. She had looked through her ancestors' records and knew that the Yinjiao people had indeed appeared 1,000 years ago. I only know that 1,000 years ago, the Yinjiao tribe came from the other side of the sea. Some people left here too, Ji Lu said. In that case, do you know who those people that left were? I don't know. I asked my father, but he wouldn't tell me. Yizong looked in the direction the Yinjiao tribe had left. Most of the people who left were expelled from Royal City. Two of them were very important. One was Mu Han from the Mu family, the other was Yi Xiang from the Yi family. Mu Han. Yi Xiang. Ji Lu didn't recognize these two names. Yizong continued, if Mu Han had won the competition, the Mu family wouldn't be what it is now. I heard that Mu Han lost the competition and was expelled from Royal City. What about Yi Xiang? Yi Xiang. In the Yi family's records, he was called inauspicious. Ever since he was born, the Yi family's ancestors had seen him as an inauspicious person who would bring disaster to the Yi family. Unfortunately, Yi Xiang was always able to avoid disaster and survive. On the other hand, those who were in conflict with him were met with disaster. When the royal city fell into civil war, the Yi family wanted to execute Yi Xiang in secret. Unfortunately, he suddenly disappeared. When Yizong had first heard about Yi Xiang, he had lamented that such a genius would be considered inauspicious. Back then, Yi Xiang had mastered many ancient divination techniques. One of them was the now extinct technique of knot divination. Since then, no one had truly mastered it. It was a pity that such a genius was gone. When the royal city fell into civil war, many were executed and many escaped. I heard that they all left with Mu Han. Yi Xiang might have left with them too. When the royal city finally calmed down and realized what had happened, the passage in the sea had already sunk. Coincidentally, the Yinjiao appeared. The royal city had targeted them before, but due to the civil war, the royal city was unstable internally. They didn't immediately attack the Yinjiao, but they spread rumors to encourage others to target the Yinjiao. Later, the Yinjiao retreated into the mountains and disappeared from sight. Gradually, they were forgotten. I see. Ji Lu sighed. She was wondering why the 6 noble families had targeted the Yinjiao tribes because of the Fox incident and the Royal City Gate incident. These were just 2 of the reasons. Then why didn't they do it earlier? Asked Ji Lu. First, they often hide in the mountains and rarely appear in the royal city. Second, the people of the royal city don't want to act rashly. If it had been 1,000 years ago, the nobles of the royal city would have acted long ago. But after thousands of years, the people of the 6 noble families had changed. No one wanted to cause trouble. They only wanted to secure their positions and reap their benefits. If it weren't for the Yi family and the Mu family's constant warnings, they would have forgotten about the threat that had slipped away. Every few decades, when Yanjiao tribes entered the royal city, the conflicts were mostly between the Yi family and the Mu family. Ji Lu thought about the behavior of the people of the royal city. Indeed, it didn't seem right. But then again, it's been so many years. Mu Han and the Yi family's misfortune should have been buried long ago, right? Unless they become like the Beast King. That's what the Yi family is worried about. Mu Han may have died a long time ago, but who knows if he has any descendants. After all, Mu Han left with a vengeance. He said he would come back for revenge. If he couldn't do it himself, he would let his descendants do it. As for Yi Xiang, he may still be alive. Perhaps he's using some secret method to survive. Everyone in the royal city knew about the Yi family's prophecy. The world will be divided after a long time, but the world will be united after a long time. But that was only half the truth. Other than the Yi family, no one else knew about the other half. The other half was a reminder to the Yi family that the misfortune was still around. Rather than the royal city attacking the Yanjiao tribe, it was more accurate to say that the Yi family and the Mu family were attacking them. The Yi family was the main driving force behind this. It was a rare opportunity. They had used the incident with the Fox tribe and the City Gate incident to persuade others to agree to send out troops. Even the method of spreading rumors and using others to do the dirty work was similar to 1,000 years ago. The other young masters of the royal city had come with the intention of fooling around. But Yi Zong had come with a mission, to find out if the Yanjiao people really had the ability to see the future. What was this ability? Did it have anything to do with Yi Xiang? If it did, the Yi family would do whatever it took to wipe out Yanjiao. Mu Han and Yi Xiang had been a thorn in the side of the royal city's 6 aristocrats. Were the Yanjiao going to become a second thorn in their side? If they didn't remove this thorn, they wouldn't be able to sleep at night. But why are the Yanjiao people heading that way? That's not a good place to live. Ji Lu pulled out a simple map. If we keep going that way, we'll reach the edge soon. If we join forces with the people behind us, we can force them to jump into the sea. Xiao Xian is powerful, but I don't think he can maintain his power forever. When he heard the words, jump into the sea, Yi Zong's eyelids twitched. He had a bad feeling about this. Chapter 490. On the royal city team's side, the beast carriages were damaged by the rocks. Before Chaoqiu City and Feng City's people arrived, they would fix the carriages and continue their journey. I don't believe we can't beat them with our manpower. Even though they had seen Xiao Xian's kick, Yi Zong and Ji Lu had both said that the Yanjiao people couldn't maintain their momentum forever. They would eventually find a chance to attack. Moreover, in front of them was a semi-desert, and beyond that was the sea. They had more people on their side, and the Yanjiao people were destined to be cornered. Thinking of this, the team that had just experienced a setback was reinvigorated. As for the Yanjiao team that had entered the semi-desert, they didn't use water directly from their canteens. Instead, they took water from the tall cactus pillars. After a cold winter, although some of the cactus pillars had frozen to death, most of them had survived. During the melting snow, they had absorbed plenty of water, and each one looked sturdy and strong. Yanjiao people rarely ventured into dry areas like this. They had always lived in the mountains and didn't lack water, but they would have to endure more in the future. They had to get used to the desert. Xiao Xian and the rest followed behind, sending a few warriors to catch up with the team in front to explain the situation. Therefore, the Yanjiao team at the front wasn't too worried. There were depressions in the ground where water had accumulated. The soil was still moist, and there were weeds growing. There were tribesmen living nearby, and when they saw the Yanjiao team, they kept their distance. Their eyes were alert and curious. They had never seen such a situation before. They couldn't understand why such a large tribe would migrate here. Did they want to settle down here? There were already few resources, and with more people, wouldn't the competition be even greater? As the days passed, Xiao Xian saw the bird in the sky again. He knew that it was checking the position of the Yinjiao team. Behind them, the royal city team was still chasing after them. They would not give up so easily. At most, they would be more cautious in their pursuit this time. Xiao Xian also saw the people of the Maka tribe, but he was not familiar with those people. He did not see Wanfu, and those people were very alert, so Xiao Xian did not go over to say hello. The tribe's route would deviate from the tribe's habitat in this semi-desert area to prevent unnecessary conflicts. The temperature was rising quickly, and this place was dry, so when Xiao Xian saw the familiar fog, he told the tribesmen to quickly collect dew. It was rare for them to encounter such good luck, otherwise they would have to endure the thirst later. As he walked through the fog, Xiao Xian smelled the scent of seawater and heard the sound of waves crashing against the shore. The sea is in front. Xiang Chen had been here several times and was familiar with this place. Since they had reached the end, what to do next could only depend on the shaman. The shaman said that the ancestors came from here, but now they wanted to go back. What kind of method could they use? Swim? Or make a few big ships? There were not enough trees around to make a ship. There was no change under the sea, unlike when Xiao Xian came, there was no passage for them to go through. A group of people gathered on the coast. People who had never seen the sea looked at it with curiosity and bewilderment. It turned out that the sea looked like this. It turned out that the sea was so big, much bigger than they imagined. However, how could they cross such a sea that they could not see the other side? It was also the shaman's first time here. Looking at the endless sea, the shaman just let everyone rest for a while and then went to find Xiao Xian. Now Xiao Xian and the others who were at the back had followed the team. When they saw the shaman coming, he said, "I'll go down first." Xiao Xian took off his animal skin bag and walked into the sea, swimming towards the depths. Below the surface of the water, there was a steep slope. The stone path was not far below. As he continued diving, Xiao Xian saw the stone path. All kinds of seaweed grew on the stone path. Many small fish swam around it, catching the small creatures on the seaweed. Seeing this, Xiao Xian knew that this stone path hadn't had a hollow for a long time. Feeling the familiar pulling force, Xiao Xian held his breath, sank to the stone path, and stood on it. When the fish saw Xiao Xian, they scattered in panic. There was too much seaweed under his feet and Xiao Xian felt it was slippery. However, this was not the time to observe this. The surroundings were dark and the light from above was not bright. But soon, Xiao Xian saw a flash of light. It was a fiery red light, and the source of the light was himself. On the 4 bone ornaments, each bead emitted a fiery red light. The light spots flickered, and then a small flame sprang out. It was not extinguished by the seawater. It swayed as if it was on land and was not affected by the surrounding seawater. Then, the fire suddenly spread like a switch. At first, it was only around Xiao Xian, but soon, the flames in the water spread along the stone path under Xiao Xian's feet. Xiao Xian held the fire crystal in his hand. When he needed to borrow a large amount of power from his ancestors, he always prepared 1 or 2 fire crystals. Previously, when he faced the royal city team, he used 1 fire crystal. Now, although he did not know what his ancestors had instructed him to do in his dream, he only brought the fire crystal as a backup. Unexpectedly, the flames emitted by the 4 bone ornaments were not under Xiao Xian's control at all. It was as if they were conscious and spontaneous. Under the dark sea, along the stone path full of seaweed, a fire dragon covered it. For a moment, the stone path looked like it was on fire. The surrounding fish avoided it and swam around curiously. When the flames on the stone path spread for a while, they suddenly rushed upward. On the shore, the Yinjiao people who were waiting anxiously saw the flames rushing up from the bottom of the sea. There was fire in the water. How could it be? But now, everything they saw was real. The flames really did come from the bottom of the sea, and the changes continued. After the flames rushed out of the sea, it was like a sharp knife cutting through the sea. Under the blue sky and white clouds, the flames in the sea pushed the waves forward. It was so dazzling. The sea breeze suddenly became violent and blew toward the shore. There seemed to be some flickering flames in the air. White waves rolled on the blue surface of the sea. They were parted by the surging flames, revealing the stone path below. On the stone path full of seaweed, there were some marine animals hiding in the seaweed. They wriggled their bodies and fled to the sides of the stone path, sliding into the walls of the sea on both sides. Xiao Xian stood on the stone path full of seaweed, looking at the broken surface of the sea in a daze. He knew the ancestors' hint in the dream was to go this way, but he didn't think it would be in such a forceful way. There was no hole in the stone path, no passage. Then he would make one. If there was no way to go, then he would make it a passageway. The Yinjiao people on the shore looked at the changes in the sea in shock. Looking at the long narrow passageway in the sea, they were even more shocked than when they saw the flame giant. The shamaness knelt down in front of the hole in the sea. They were grateful for everything the ancestor had done for them. They were grateful that the ancestor had given them a chance to go back. Then Chief Sheng Luo, hunting team leader Duo Kong, and the others all knelt down. The bird in the sky cried out in alarm and turned around to fly back. "There's no time, let's go." Zheng Luo turned and shouted, "Everyone, follow me." Zheng Luo and the shamaness walked at the front of the group, heading into the sea. More than 4,000 people lined up in a long line, following the shamaness and the chief into the sea. If someone didn't know what was going on, they would probably think it was a mass suicide. When everyone stepped onto the stone path full of seaweed, as the last two people stepped in, the flames behind them retracted, and the split seawater gathered back together. Walking on such a long stone path with no end in sight, the sea walls on both sides grew taller and taller. Everyone was nervous. Through the flames, they looked inside the sea walls and saw schools of fish swimming in the sea. When they got close, they suddenly turned around and left. Giant fish swam from the bottom of the stone path, from the depths of the sea. Walking on the stone path, they could see its blurry silhouette. At the closest point, they could even see the faint stripes on its body. Young children looked at the walls of the sea that were coated with a layer of fire. They nervously grabbed the corner of their father's clothes, almost falling because of the slippery seaweed under their feet. Xiao Xian suppressed his shock and continued forward. Behind him, the long line of people followed, gradually leaving the shore. Near the shore, the sea had returned to its original state, without any trace of the split water. Rumble, Royal City, Chaoqiu City and Feng City's groups were all heading this way. The closer they got to the shore, the more confused they became. Where were the Yinjiao people? Weren't they all heading this way? Why did they suddenly disappear? Could it be that they could turn into fish? Where did they go? What's wrong with the people in front? Why aren't they continuing? In the carriage, Ji Lu pulled the curtain aside and shouted. "Young master, in front, in front," the person reporting from the front stuttered, unable to speak clearly. Ji Lu waved his hand angrily and jumped off the carriage to take a look. Yizong's eyelids twitched, the ominous feeling growing stronger. He also jumped off the carriage and strode forward. Standing on higher ground, they looked at the sea. Not far from the shore, there was a long opening. They could even see people walking through the opening. And that crack was still moving into the distance. The person standing on a giant beast almost fell off the beast when he saw the scene in the sea. What is that? Someone tell me what that is." Ji Lu pointed at the sea and roared. Walking in the sea. How was that possible? How was that possible? Izong closed his eyes, his hands still trembling. He regretted it now. He should have ordered his men to chase after them and kill them before they entered the sea at all costs. But it was too late to regret now. It was already too late. 1,000 years ago, Mu Han and the others had caused internal strife in Royal City and left with their people. The Yinjiao people had come from the other side of the sea. Now, the Yinjiao people were returning from here. Would the people who had left come from there? Xiao Xian turned back to look at the shore. From where he was, he could see the people standing on the backs of the beasts. After leaving, Xiao Xian had a feeling that this was not an eternal farewell. He would come back again. As Xiao Xian led the Yinjiao team along the stone path, on the other side of the sea, in the fearsome beast mountain forest. The shamaness stood by the fire pit, looking at the flames that had suddenly risen. She gave an order. Half a day later, a 1,000-man team led by 7 fearsome beasts emerged from the forest. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.